once again, we're going to be talking about Zionism. We're also going to be talking about the war in general, how it's playing out, um, the role that both that Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, the IDF, Israel in general, all have to play. And we're going to talk about the responses to it, not only from our political leaders, such as Joe Biden, but also from the commentators. Everyone from Destiny to Hassan Piker to Brianna Joy Gray, who's come out with a few excessively interesting tweets of late that I think bears mentioning. But given that this is something that Socrates wanted me to set up, I'm going to let him kind of start this show, kind of give your opening thoughts, tell us why you wanted to talk to Quibbles today, and then we'll kind of get we'll just have a conversation together. That sound good, gang?
Sounds perfect.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Socrates.
so Wick, as you all know, hosted a all-Jewish panel on Zionism, not this last Monday yesterday, but the one before, 8 days ago. And I was on a plane, so I couldn't attend, but I really wanted to, and I watched it. I did a review, I thought the panel went really, really great. I was really happy to hear a lot of different Jewish perspectives and show people who maybe don't have any Jewish friends or people in their lives. Show them like a bunch of different Jews with different perspectives on on Zionism, on the war, on occupation, on all these different things, on what they kind of personally feel like in the aftermath of October 7th. I felt like Quibbles, I heard what felt like the most different perspective from mine. So I figured it would probably be most interesting and exciting for everybody else for the two of us to talk and kind of share our perspectives with each other. And yeah, it seemed like it would be a fun time.
Well, and with that, can you give us like your take on everything, Socrates? And I guess to be more specific, can you tell us the main problems that you had with what Quibbles had been saying in that discussion?
Yeah, so the I think the I think one of the biggest contentions I had, and I'm not even sure exactly where I land on this, but this idea that primarily Gaza is suffering because of Hamas, I think is kind of an integral part of how we feel about the conflict right now. And so that seems like a question really worth digging into. Because if it's the
Mhm.
case that, any violence that Israel does is kind of like justified and provoked by Hamas actions, then that makes a big difference. If the kind of humanitarian suffering in Gaza is primarily due to the actions of Hamas, if they're diverting all the aid, diverting all the water, fuel, etc., then that has a big difference in terms of how we kind of feel about the conflict overall. And it sounded like your perspective was that, and I guess this is it's part of why I want to have a conversation for clarification, not just for arguing
Mhm.
or whatever. But
Mhm.
it sounded like your perspective overall was that the suffering, both in terms of obviously there's a lot to retribution against Gaza and Hamas is due to October 7th. That's pretty straightforward. But the overall kind of conditions in Gaza, how much are those due to kind of necessary security enforcement by Israel against Hamas? And then when it comes to kind of humanitarian levels, the levels of water and fuel and kind of just basic city infrastructure, how much of the lack of that is due to overly harsh Israeli boycotts versus diversion of funds. Those seem like two kind of basic areas of contention.
Yeah.
Is
So
that fair?
so let's start with like a basic question. If you were Palestinian and you had a choice between living in Israel proper or living in the West Bank or living in Gaza, How would you rank those?
Yeah, so I would say, from top to bottom, Israel, West Bank, Gaza. I think that's like, yeah.
Okay. Um, so why do you rank it that way?
So the access to jobs, the access to clean drinking water, so the access to basic necessities and the access to opportunities and the freedom of movement.
Okay.
I think correlate basically with those.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. So what do you see as the basic barriers if it's not Hamas, right? The obvious explanation that I would have is that when I think about what the Israeli government is, I think of it as being a broadly somewhat right wing, although not as far right as some people might claim it to be. But certainly on social policies, they're not as left as I would like them to be, but they're a lot further left than anywhere else in the Middle East. But they're basically a democracy-ish. Approximately parliamentary system, but approximately democracy, and approximately they certainly have problems. But I think in a lot of ways that I would think of the problems of being a Palestinian in Israel proper as mirroring in certain ways the problems of being Black in America.
Sure.
Whereas I would say that the experience of being Palestinian in Gaza materially worse, right? Significantly worse. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you explain why Gaza is so difficult for the people in Gaza?
So I guess just to lay the groundwork for like what's so bad, just so we know kind of what the factors are that we're talking about, and we can talk about where those came from. So I think historically it's been pretty low levels of access to drinking water. So something like 70 liters a day, and the WHO recommendation was like 100 liters a day, per person, and now it's down to like 3 liters a day or something. It's like 96% of the water is contaminated, unusable, either seawater or refuse water, and part of that is in relation to the lack of fuel because water has to be pumped, desalination and filtration systems need fuel to operate. Historically, it's been really high unemployment, something like 2/3, maybe 40%. Right now, I don't even know if that's kind of like a relevant statistic to talk about because I think like 2/3 of Gazans are displaced from their homes. So right now, obviously during the conflict,
so let's just take these
kind of an exacerbated situation.
So let's take these one by one. So you said water security is one of them. You said the problem of homelessness is another. You said the problem of joblessness is another, right? Those are your basic three.
And yeah,
okay.
I mean fuel kind of in there. That's kind of related. Yeah.
Okay, fair. Okay, so in terms of water, Hamas has regularly, they've been doing this for decades, not decades, but over a decade. They've been literally taking water pipes, digging them out of the ground, and filming themselves digging out these water pipes out of the ground in order to change these water pipes into rockets to shoot it at innocent civilians, right? While hiding behind other innocent civilians to do it.
So that's.
I sent a link if you're curious.
Awesome. Okay, that's perfect.
If you're willing, Wick, if you could put that on screen, actually, I put it in our group chat. This is from the Telegraph. So it's from so it's just sort of an overview of the times that they've done that. IDF has done a number of videos explaining how exactly they do it, but so too has Hamas themselves. Hamas not only does this, but they also brag about it and are filming themselves doing it constantly.
And here, I just put a link that uses
I'm
this,
trying to, if one of you could pull it up and then stream it in here, I'll give you perms to do that for a minute. It's just I don't have the setup to.
Oh, here, I can share.
Yeah, just share your.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's fine. If I had been warned that there would be these, I could have prepared.
That's my bad.
I guess I should have thought it.
And so.
Here, I'll just give you a role that you can do that real quick. Go ahead, Socrates. Share your screen. Put it up.
Let's see. So yeah, I had lots of questions like this about different specific things, and we don't have to go into a huge amount of detail on stream.
Yeah, sure.
But this is exactly the kind of thing that I was really interested in because I've heard claims like this before, and I was trying to substantiate it. I saw that they the instance that I could find readily was them tearing up water pipes from an illegal settlement that was like stealing water from Gaza.
No, this
But
isn't. This
is
isn't
something
that at
else.
all. This is not that at all. This is the European Union. I'm just reading directly from it.
Mhm.
The European Union helped to build more than 30 miles of water pipelines from Palestinians, despite Hamas terrorists boasting of their ability to forge an arsenal of homemade rockets from pipes. Brussels has poured almost 100 million euros into pipeline projects in territories controlled by the Islamist group over the last decade. A telegraph analysis of the bloc's foreign aid found. Yeah. So they're literally just doing this.
So
right? This is a thing that they've done repeatedly.
yeah, so this is one question I had, which is there's a big difference between they've done this or they've boasted that they could do it, and this is like the primary thing that's happening, right? So Gaza gets its water from this aquifer that's like at double its capacity in terms of extraction. They buy it from I can't remember. It's called like Melkor or something. It's not Melkor, but it's like the main Israeli water utility. They buy water directly from them, either being piped. Or
It's
in
mostly
trucks.
provided. It's not really purchased. It's provided by the Israeli
I don't
government. But
wanna-
continue. Yeah.
I don't want to get like too bogged down into like
Yeah, that's fair.
Well,
That's
the
fair.
very
So I think-
specific thing, because if we could have 2 hours where we argue about water pipes, but I want to broaden the discussion
Well,
if that's okay.
Sure.
Does
quick.
that make
So
sense?
so
Yeah. So I mean, I think that
so
the
I will push
the
for a
broad
little bit
point-
more on this, just because
Okay, go
this
ahead.
this
Sure,
is
that's
water in the desert in Gaza. This is currently one of the biggest humanitarian issues, and so I think
You are
this
absolutely
is-
correct.
I think this is a critical thing, and I haven't like fully made up my mind one way or another. I'm at the kind of searching for a full set of sources to really kind of understand the scope of the situation. But this question of like how prevalent is Hamas tearing up water pipes? Are those water pipes the difference between getting clean water, between yeah.
Yeah, I think that the broad answer that I would provide is sort of twofold. One component of it is yes, that they are doing this to some
You
degree.
can turn off your stream now.
All right.
They are doing this to some degree, but the broader problem is that they have not invested whatsoever in their own water security for the people of Gaza. The broad like contention that I have about Hamas just in general is that they see their people as a resource rather than seeing their people as an end in of themselves, if that makes sense.
I
Right? They
think-
treat them
yeah.
as a way of using them as cover, so as human shields. They use them as a way of generating funds. They've saved off $11 billion to their leadership that now live in Qatar. They've done all of these things that are not the actions of a person who cares about the people of Gaza in and of themselves.
Yeah, I think on that point I would pretty much fully agree with. I think there's surely some sentiment. I don't know how much that's shared from like the leadership to the kind of like middle managers within Hamas to like people, kind of closer to the ground, of some sentiment of, really wanting and caring about Palestinian autonomy and,
Yeah.
some kind of liberation. I think that's in there, but in terms of what their actions have done, there's a huge level of selfishness and corruption, and siphoning off funds that could be put toward projects. Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess at the base level, my basic sort of undergirding thought process about when I'm trying to understand the war between Hamas and the Israeli government, Hamas is using human shields. And the fact that they're using human shields means two things. One thing that it means is that they consider their own people to be dispensable, right? To be used as cover, to be used as just sort of weapons of war. Wait, everyone's frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear
Oh,
you.
you're no longer frozen.
I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
I'm just
you
being
look
really
fine over here.
still, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, cool.
Wick
Sorry
blending
about
in.
that. So yeah, they use they see their people as dispensable. They see their people as just a tool towards an end. And also the other thing that it means when you use human shields and you use human shields successfully. I'm frozen again. What the heck?
I guess just keep
I don't know
going
what's
because you
going on.
look.
Okay,
I don't
Yeah,
know. You
you're
look
I look
fine.
bummed out.
fine.
You're
Yeah.
working on our
I don't know
end,
what's
so
going
go
on.
ahead.
Very strange. Um, yeah, what it means is that also the Israeli side does care and is not willing to just, kill indiscriminately. And that would suggest something, I'd argue, about the moral distinction between the IDF and between Hamas.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Um, so
Can I, if I may,
yeah, please.
right? If I may, because I want to kind of give this conversation some structure, a through line, if you will, to kind of tie these things together. Um, and if you both are amenable to it, I want to talk about Zionism and what that is and how that plays into all of this, because that's what the panel was about last time. And Socrates, almost everyone on the panel that I was on, that I hosted, was in some way or another a Zionist. Do you consider yourself a Zionist, Socrates?
Um, I think we need to define Zionism before I really say anything for it to be meaningful. So, in the sense that,
I guess, what do you think a
um,
Zionist is?
so when Zionism started, the idea was we should create a safe space and a like a country for Jews. You know, it's something that Jews have wanted for a long time, and then that was given a boost after World War II, but it didn't originate there. That idea has been going on for a long time. When it came to where that Jewish state would be, the necessity for it to be in the kind of biblical homeland is something that people who all considered themselves Zionists were very split on. So there were some people who considered themselves Zionists who said we need to have a country like for Jews, by Jews, and exclusively for Jews in the Middle East, in Canaan, in basically where Israel is today, or maybe larger, maybe smaller, I don't know, but basically there, and basically only for Jews, and a kind of I don't want to sound hyperbolic by saying like a Jewish ethno state, but that was basically like one camp. And then there was another umbrella within people who considered themselves Zionists who wanted to have a
Okay.
multicultural open society. And that's more where I
What
would
do you?
fall in
Okay,
terms of
so
yeah.
you don't. In other words, you don't agree with Israel as it stands today. You think that Israel as it is today, as you view it as a Jewish ethno state, it's not something that you would support.
No, it's not.
Okay,
That being said,
cool.
to be really really clear, I believe that Israel is a country that exists and is recognized, and therefore has a right to its continued existence. It's important
Sure.
to say. Maybe it doesn't sound like it's like a necessary disclaimer,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not like an obvious position that everybody who's critical of
Fair
Israel
enough.
holds. So it's important for me to say that.
Yeah, so you believe that Israel should exist. You believe that it should be Jewish majority, but you don't believe that it should be an ethno state. Um, uh, what are your contentions? What do you think that we disagree on?
Um, so what do I think that you and I disagree on? So
Yeah.
um, so I think that in the early days of the creation of Israel, there was a recognition that for the founders to have the kind of state that they wanted, there was going to have to be a significant displacement of Palestinians. And whether that would come through land buy offs or some kind of conflict was a little bit open ended, and both occurred. And I see that through line running through the history of Israel. And while um, while the motivations, so characterizing any single country throughout decades as having like one identity or one motivation is pretty tricky. But you could say, if you look at the United States, for example, by analogy, that the kind of what was the phrase, like some Latin phrase or something, where they wanted to expand across the continent, that it was like God's will.
Predestination.
Yeah, something like that. But there's like a special phrase.
Yeah.
Somebody will know in chat. That's something that you can trace in terms of the actions of America, even though it was different presidents, it was different people, from one generation to the next. You could see there is this kind of like trend of wanting to expand across the country, willing to displace people.
Okay, so you're saying that you think that Israel's an expansionist state. So you think that Israel is an expansionist state, and you don't think that I do.
Yeah.
Okay, if they were an expansionist state at one point in the relatively recent past, they were in control over the entirety of the Sinai. They tried to give it back. They successfully eventually gave it back. They tried to give Gaza back. They couldn't give Gaza back. Egypt wouldn't take Gaza back. How do you explain that?
Wait, can you clarify which specific time frame you're talking about in terms of giving Gaza back? I know what you're talking about.
Sinai. Yeah. I don't want to get the numbers wrong.
Yeah, and so
manifest.
Yeah, they took the Sinai in the
Destiny,
6 Day War.
Mhm.
They took the Sinai in the 6 Day War, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then they gave it back to Egypt as part of like not just a treaty, but like kind of normalized relations. And since then,
yeah, in 1979 they gave it back. Yeah,
pretty good with Egypt. So
Yeah.
that's a great example of giving up land for security. And so I don't discount those. I don't think that Israel is only focused on expansion. I see that as a factor. So
wait, okay, so I'm confused. So you're saying their goal is to expand, but they're not
a goal.
They weren't willing to expand there because they were trying to do a thing for security reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to maintain their security, they were saying that they're not going to do this expansion, even though you think that they are an expansionist organization.
Yeah.
Okay. What are some examples of a time where they did expand and they didn't give it back, and you believe that they should have?
So over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 decades of not just allowing settlers to expand into the West Bank, but sending soldiers. I don't know if this is true. This is something that I heard. Maybe you can correct. That there was something like 32 battalions of troops guarding settlements and only 2 guarding the border with Gaza when October 7th occurred.
Yeah, it's something like 60. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a majority of their armed forces in the IDF at any given time prior to the 7th were stationed in the West Bank.
Mm-hmm. So that's the situation that I would characterize as making so that kind of choice between like expansionism and security.
Yeah, so you see that as a matter of expansion. So I want to clarify, when you say that it's expansionist, what component there is your contention is the expansionism? Is the expansionism the fact that they occupy Area C, or is the expansion the fact that there are Jews who are settling there?
So the individual Jews who are settling there, I think that says something about Israeli society and some subset of Israelis who either for religious reasons or just kind of like more of a kind of, I don't know.
Wait, now I'm confused.
Well,
is this a conversation about because when you say that Israel is expansionist, I interpreted that to mean you're saying the government of Israel, but now you're saying you're making a critique of individual Israelis, which is a different type of critique.
No,
right?
I'm gonna talk about both. Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine.
It's a difficult conversation it's a difficult conversation to have because I'm talking about characterizing like a whole nation of people, and I want to be a little bit comprehensive in terms of what I'm talking about, what factors I'm looking at. I apologize if it ends up being overly verbose, but I do want to be as clear as possible while I'm doing this, so that you can get a clear sense of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I see that expansionism within Israeli society in terms of individual Israelis. So those aren't like government programs to get people to settle. Those are individual people who, of their own accord, decide to go settle. Or that's my understanding. I don't think it's primarily.
Okay, so there are individual Jews who live in Israel currently,
Mhm.
who have not lived in Israel for very long, who have, generally speaking, either themselves been forced out or have had family members who have been forced out of, whether it be across the Middle East or it's Ethiopia or it's Poland or it's Germany, wherever it might be. There's a large group of Jews, about 500,000, who want to live in the West Bank. And specifically, 90% of them will live within a mile of the border, but about 50,000 of them live further inland, and specifically live in places like Hebron, live in places like the Cave of the Patriarchs, live places that are incredibly important from a religious perspective in Judaism. Why do you see that as an Israeli topic rather than a Jewish topic, specifically in the context of like places like Hebron?
Sure, that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it quite like that. I think for me, I was thinking slightly narrower in my scope because these are specifically Israeli citizens who are doing this, and they are Jewish.
Right, but let's be careful here, because when you say that they're Israeli citizens, there are only three types of citizenships that exist in the West Bank. You're either an Israeli citizen, you're a Jordanian citizen, or you have paperwork, not citizenship, but paperwork of the Palestinian Authority.
Mhm.
The Palestinian Authority doesn't provide citizenship to Jews, and the Jordanians. I want to be careful here. There are Jews who have Jordanian citizenships,
Mhm.
but it is much more difficult as a Jew to get citizenship, particularly if you're going to live in the West Bank, than it is to get Israeli citizenship, right?
So
So it's not really fair to call them Israelis just because on paper that's the citizenship that they have, if it's not really the affiliation that they have.
So to clarify, are you contending that the majority, or maybe the most, so that 50,000 who are moving furthest afield into the West Bank, that those are primarily people who have been kicked out of other countries and are going straight to settlements?
I would describe them as having made decisions that can be best described on religious grounds rather than being best described on the grounds of government.
Sure. But
right?
I just want to talk about it. So maybe you can correct this. Maybe this is a fallacy on my part. What I'm thinking is, somebody leaves some other country, if they're leaving, from 40 years ago from a pogrom in Ukraine, or something like 80 years ago from a pogrom in Ukraine, like my family, and they move to Israel, and then like their children decide they want to start go into a settlement and start settling. Are you talking about people like going? So in my mind, I'm thinking about they move to Israel, and then they decide, so they move to Tel Aviv or whatever, and then they decide they want to go start a settlement. But are you saying that they're actually going straight from like being
I don't think
kicked out
that
of Jordan
it's particularly relevant. I actually don't think it's relevant.
Wait, sorry,
if you're asking,
or
like,
don't think it's relevant?
I don't think it's
You
relevant.
don't think it's relevant?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah. So the equivalent that I think of is like, okay, there are all these people who have Jordanian citizenships in the West Bank. I don't feel comfortable calling them Jordanians. I feel much more comfortable calling them Palestinians, even though they have Jordanian citizenships, if that makes sense.
Okay. So I just
like the best way to understand their psychology and the best way to understand the way that they interact with the world around them is to understand them as being Palestinians who want to live in Palestine. And the best way to understand these Jews is to understand them as being Jews who want to live in Judea.
So I guess here's why that feels really hard for me to see that way. Because these are people who are legally Israelis. They have the
or
rights
legally
of
Jordanian. Yeah.
Sure. But, well, so, I mean, some of them, I don't know what proportion You said it doesn't matter.
I don't know
where
the
they come
exact
from,
proportions, but I don't remember the exact proportions off the top of my head. If you wanted to, we could look them up. But there is a portion of people who are Palestinian Arabs who live in the West Bank who have Jordanian citizenships that are either themselves from prior to, this is very rare, prior to 1948, or are the result of being the children of people who had Jordanian citizenships prior to 48. So that does exist, right? That is a group of people who exist in the West Bank, but I don't think I'm comfortable calling them Jordanian just because they have a Jordanian citizenship.
Sure. I just want to understand if you have a contention with my conception of people who are settlers as basically people who from wherever move to Israel, like Israel proper, like like the legal borders of Israel, and then from there, like move to a settlement, start a settlement. Is there something fundamentally wrong with that, with my conception?
If you're talking about the ones who are within a mile of the border, which is 90% of them, I think that is approximately a reasonable way of understanding their psychology. I don't think it's just a matter, like, if you're asking like historically,
I just mean like logistically
yeah, if you mean in
speaking,
terms of like logistically,
yeah,
that is logistically the way that I think a lot of people have ended up in the West Bank, yes. But if you're talking about historically and psychologically, like how they understand and they ought to be understood by others as having arrived where they are, I think that is a matter that you're putting more of an emphasis on states and a lot less of an emphasis on religion. And I think that the religion is the best way, and ethnicity is also the best way to understand how they got there.
May I ask just a clarifying question for my understanding of this?
Yeah, please.
This is to you, Socrates. Is your problem with the settlements in the West Bank the fact that they're simply settling there, right, as Israeli citizens or otherwise? Or is the problem, and this is how I always thought the problem was, is because of how they are doing it, which is to go in with the force of the state, Israel behind them, guarding them, evicting Palestinians who live there now off the land, killing them, and doing other atrocities and such to them, and basically do that. I guess for me, just to get in on this conversation, I don't give a shit if someone lives somewhere, right? If they just go and they move there, right? Like that's immigration. Why is that bad? But if they're kicking people out of their homes and then they have the force of the state behind them to ensure that they can just evict whoever they want, that's a different thing. And then that's when I have a problem. So I guess to just be clear, do you have a problem with Israeli citizens moving into the West Bank, assuming they don't kick anyone out or hurt anyone?
So, given that everything that what you said is happening, then yes, I have a problem. Given that when somebody does move there, that's exactly what happens. In some alternate reality where Israeli citizens can move and start a homestead and start farming somewhere in the West Bank, and people in the West Bank can move somewhere to Israel and start farming. In that alternate reality, I wouldn't have a problem with it, right? That would be people going somewhere farming.
So your problem is
my issue is everything that you said.
Non-Israeli citizens can't go into the Israel to settle there, but the Israeli citizens can go. And so setting aside the violence, right? Setting aside the violence thing, because unless your claim or contention is that every single one of these settlers are engaged in that,
they're not all terrorists, but not by a long shot, no.
Sure. So the ones who aren't engaged in that, I think, should be fine, right?
Well, yeah. So my issue primarily, and the reason I'm looking at this also, Quibbles, to answer your question, the reason that I primarily look at this, not saying I'm not interested in motivations or mindset, but just from a kind of basic overview level as being, related to countries, is that settlers move in, even if no Palestinian people are evicted from there or are killed or their crops, burned or anything like that, that area is then walled off, fenced off, and freedom of movement through there by Palestinians is no longer possible. And you get this Bantustanization
Yeah. So
of the West Bank, where access to resources, access to water, access to contiguous like villages is cut off. And it's no longer
this is the premise of my first. This is the premise of my first debate with Destiny, and yeah, I think my basic answer to it is that the 90% who are within a border are changing literally by less than 1%, where exactly the borders are lined up, but they have no effect on the ability of the West Bank to be an independent country in the future, right? It doesn't have you don't have this non-contiguous, complicated border lines. Blah, blah,
sure.
blah, blah.
It's a slower erosion, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, it's not an erosion at all in terms of the capacity for it to be a country.
Well, I mean, okay, just to be a little bit like detailed or direct, like
Yeah.
if somebody moves over a border and then that border consumes their area, then over time that border shifts, right? That's
If I think the equivalent would be if Canada were to purchase North Dakota, right? Would that stop America from being able to have a functional country? The answer being no.
well.
However,
If they purchase in North
they were
Dakota every 5
instead
years,
right,
then
if they
would.
were instead to be purchasing up a massive component. So this is the matter of the difference between occupation and the people living there, right? Again, the vast majority, it's something like 58% of them live in like 5 locations, five different settlements specifically, and then 90% of them live within a mile of the border. So those are not people who are affecting the ability of the West Bank to be an independent country. Now we can get into the reasons why it is necessary, particularly around Jerusalem, for those settlements to exist. But at the baseline, I think we can recognize they're not impacting the ability of the West Bank to be independent.
Well,
those who are of the 50,000
Well,
are
wait,
hold
affected.
on.
So I
Does
hold
Socrates
contention with
agree
that.
with that?
No, so
Like-
so I don't agree with that. So you were saying if Canada purchases North Dakota, it doesn't affect the U.S. being a contiguous state. But if they purchase in North Dakota every 5 years,
But they're not doing that. North Dakota is actually a bad example because North Dakota, I would imagine, as a percentage of the country, is a higher percentage than the 1% of the country by landmass that we're talking about in the context of all of the settlements.
Are there more settlements of that sort within? Okay, I mean, even a mile in the kind of area that we're talking about is not a tiny amount. Is not a tiny amount of space, right? In the New Jersey size total landmass that we're talking about, even a mile from the border is not nothing. But within that mile, I mean, are there more settlements over time or fewer?
When you say more settlements, do you mean more settlements by landmass or do you mean more settlements by people?
I guess by landmass is maybe the most,
because that's
relevant.
The settlements by landmass is the relevant component, and by landmass, the 5 big ones, I have their names, I can pull them up. The 5 largest ones are representative of 58% of all of the people, right? And so if you're talking about those five are not growing at all. So I would assume that you're comfortable with those 5, right?
Sure. I don't know. I wanted to look up like a map or something of this over time because I'm not sure that I can quite grasp what you're talking about, where over time there's more people moving across the border and somehow the border isn't shifting. Or
more
won't
people
shift.
living there doesn't mean that it's taking up more space, right? They're just like they're
so that's not entirely true
in these areas. There's a densification, but the densification doesn't necessarily mean that it's growing in landmass. When you're talking about the growth in landmass, there are also growths in landmass, but again, the totality of this, it's worth pointing out, is less than 1% and has been throughout the history of Israel.
Sure.
Right?
So when we talk about density versus landmass, if a settlement is like one family, maybe the army isn't going to do much. Maybe they're not going to build new fences or walls or borders. But if that grows, even if the area is still roughly the same to a certain density of people, they might build new walls, new fences, right? Is that a reasonable presumption?
Okay, so there's multiple things you said there. Okay, so in terms of new fences and new like checkpoints and all of that, like yes, obviously when there are more checkpoints and all of that, obviously that is going to have an impact on people's day-to-day lives, and obviously that is a negative implication, of course. However, that's different. Like that is not a guarantee by virtue of simply having more people. So I'm trying to understand: is your concern a growth in the amount of space being held by Jews living in the West Bank / Judea, or is your concern the number of Jews who live there?
So I think both independently and in conjunction are an issue.
Okay, I need to understand, like, why is it a problem, just the number of Jews in and of itself?
Yep, I can explain. So
Okay.
if more people move across the border, are building wells, sucking up water, being on land, they're not.
Nope, that's not what I asked. Just careful. I want to be really clear.
They're not
I'm
building
not
wells?
talking about. No, I'm not talking about the water issues. Water issues valid. You're totally right about.
Okay.
I'm asking void context in and of itself. Is it a problem that there's an increase in population just as an end in and of itself, regardless of effects on natural resources for the Palestinian people? In and of itself, is it a problem that there become an increase in number of Jews living there?
Sure. Even if you take those, if you take all the material things away, I think it's still an issue, which is it's tough for for Palestinians to de-radicalize as they see more and more people moving onto their lands, even if it's like, okay, well, it's not so far in, it's not specifically in a place that's going to create a discontinuity between other parts of Palestinian territory.
Yeah,
I think that's an
again,
issue. The fact that it's illegal, the fact that Israel's still
there's a snug
supporting
premise
it.
there.
Sorry?
There's a snug premise there. There's a
Okay.
snug premise
Please,
there.
please
The
let me
snug
know.
premise being, yeah, you said people moving onto their land, which is a snug premise because this is land that has been paid for, right? It's been purchased. We're not talking about the outposts. We're talking about settlements, right? So the difference being an outpost is a place that people are just there illegally. Jews are there illegally, whereas a settlement is a place which has been purchased rightfully, right? Now, I want to be careful. When I say rightfully, I mean according to the Israeli government. I do not mean according to the UN. The UN is opposed to it regardless.
Okay.
But in terms so when you're saying that there's a snug premise there, which is that you're suggesting that you're assuming that the UN is the one who is correct here. I'm curious why.
So I think whether they purchase it or whether they're kind of like squatting, I think I think there's some relevance to it. I don't think that's that should be totally thrown away.
What
I think there's some difference, but I don't think there's a distinction.
So if I go, say I become Jewish for whatever reason, I go in and I want to buy the house of a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank, right? I want to buy his house. I want to live there, and he's okay with it. He's like, yeah, sure. Give me this amount of money, and you can buy my house. I'll go, live in my other house or just do whatever. Why is that bad? Why is that wrong? Why shouldn't I be able to do that?
So let's look at two things. So let's look at two scenarios with that. So first scenario, yeah, he's like, oh, sure, that's great. You're paying 20% more what somebody else would. That's great. Go ahead. I think in that circumstance, it's certainly not as bad as if you're buying it out from
why
under
is it
them.
bad?
So,
but why is it bad
so,
at all? What's the problem?
So, given the state of the Israeli economy compared to Palestinian economy, which I think is impacted by a lot of the long-standing issues that we've been talking about, think about the perspective of being Palestinian and praying at night that you can get a work visa to work a little bit in Israel.
So you're making a gentrification argument.
It's so far past gentrification that it's like
no, but it is gentrification.
It's gentrification on unbelievable. It's like, okay, so there's gentrification over here, which is white people moving into Bushwick or whatever from Manhattan, and then there's like ethnic cleansing. It's somewhere within there. We'll probably disagree, but I think it's past simply gentrification.
I'm just confused. Like I understand why there are problems with historically black neighborhoods becoming no longer majority black, and I understand why that's something that people are concerned about. Absolutely. And I get why, similarly, people are concerned about neighborhoods that have been historically Muslims ceasing to be Muslim. And that's why, in the case of the West Bank, there's been a very concerted focus on not doing displacement of people. That's why the overwhelming majority of these settlements are not in the cities. That's why the overwhelming majority of these settlements all of these settlements are less than 1% of the landmass, right? So if you're talking about 1% of the landmass, in a place, let's talk about, I don't know, Bushwick, right? Some place that's being gentrified in the United States. If 1% of the landmass of Bushwick was all of a sudden white, like, is that really some fundamental crime? The much larger issue is that people in Bushwick are struggling financially, and the much larger problem is that black people are struggling. So the solution there is, okay, let's give a fuck ton of financial aid to the black people of Bushwick, right? The solution is not to just say, never for all of time will we change Bushwick in any way. Never for all of time will we densify Bushwick, even though clearly there's a massively larger number of people who want to live in Bushwick than currently do live in Bushwick. We're just going to keep it exactly as is forever. And meanwhile, we're going to lock these people who live there in permanent poverty.
Wait, whose plan were you saying it was to lock the people of Bushwick in poverty?
I think that when you're saying that
I was following you until the very end.
Yeah. The point is that, like, long term, if we agree that a 2/3 state solution, wherein Gaza is its own independent country and where the West Bank is its own independent country and where Israel is its own independent country, if that's our end goal, and we understand that right now the people of the West Bank are massively financially behind Israel proper, then the only solution is to figure out some sort of a way to make the economy of the West Bank better than it is currently. Well, what's the best way to do that? The best way to do that is to increase the amount of education, right? They're doing that currently in terms of Qatar has a lot of criticisms of Qatar. I made a whole video on Qatar and why I struggle with them. But Qatar is doing a bunch of in terms of education there. And also, there is a massive number of majority Jewish people who want to live in the West Bank and who are significantly wealthier than the average person who lives in the West Bank currently, and are trying to pull in literally billions of dollars in investments into the West Bank. So isn't that good for the economy of the West Bank? And if it's not taking up a large proportion of the space of the West Bank, it's not displacing people, then what's the problem here?
If you can demonstrate to me that what you're talking about is happening, then I'd be very interested in that. But that's a very different conversation.
I just want to clarify. What you're looking for there is evidence of economic integration and the economic benefits to the Palestinian people as a result of places where people are living in the West Bank.
I think
Jews living in the West Bank.
Yeah, I think there's some ratio where the level of gentrification and displacement is low enough and the economic benefit is high enough that's worth
There's just not much there.
About.
You said right there displaced people. We're not talking about displaced people.
Well,
we're talking about 1% of the land. We're not talking about anyone being forced out.
Then that ratio is zero, right? But that's
just for clarity. I don't think Quibbles, unless you want to, Quibbles is not defending the people who are evicting people from their homes.
Sure.
No, of course.
I was saying what the formula is.
I want to be
super
super clear.
That one part of that is
I want to be
zero,
super clear there. Before we move forward, I want to answer Wick's point there. I am not defending the idea of kicking people out of their homes. in the case of, there was a very famous one in Sheikh Jarrah. In the case of, because Sheikh Jarrah, because the old city of Jerusalem, are really important religiously and in terms of historical significance. I do think that it's really important to make sure that certain locations are not changing physically over time. And so therefore, I do think that it's important to make sure that people are not able to just add new wings onto their homes. And so I think it's really difficult to figure out how you're going to parse how to do that. The way that the Israeli government has been doing it so far has been that they have said, okay, if you make a new wing to your home, you won't get that new wing of your home. You cannot make these changes to the physical location because it's really important that we
Well,
maintain this history, this physical
fair.
the
I
physical
think that
history.
even
And so as a
with
result, well, I just want to
sure.
finish it. As a result of that, their solution has been, for those people who do make physical changes to their homes, what they're going to do is they're going to move someone else into that new wing of their home. When I say new wing, I mean very old wing that they have literally dug out of the ground, out of the history of the ground. And I think that is a very imperfect solution. But I think the alternative is a slow-moving. People talk about slow-moving ethnic cleansing. I think that the alternative of allowing people to just dig up that history is a slow-moving ethnic cleansing. I think the cleansing of place is a really important thing to be concerned about, not just the cleansing of people.
But we're not talking, like, I know that in America you can't make changes to like if you own a historical home, you can't change it just at will. You have to get government permission.
And so these
There
are
other
significantly
things, right?
more important.
So if that's what you're talking about, I think that's different than what I'm asking, though. What I'm asking,
but that is what you're asking. Places like Sheikh Jarrah, places like, Mohammed Al-Kurd, he's a very famous pro-Palestine, I'll call him pro-Palestine, activist. So the places that they're talking about are places like Sheikh Jarrah. They're talking about places that are really, really, really important in terms of the history, not just of Jews or of Muslims, but of Christians as well, Baha'i, of all of these people.
And you're claiming that
Mm-hmm.
other than those sites of historical significance, that settlers are not engaging in evictions, forceful violence, and other things against Palestinians.
We're talking about the West. Yeah. So we're talking about the West Bank right now. We're not talking about East Jerusalem. When we talk about East Jerusalem, that's where you start getting into places that are similar to Sheikh Jarrah. That's where you start getting into places where you're talking about digging up history and you're talking about the ethnic cleansing of place, right? Rather than cleansing of people. The cleansing of place component, there is absolutely a concerted effort by certain radical Jews to cleanse East Jerusalem of Muslims as a whole. And there was equally a concerted effort by Muslims, by Palestinians, and Muslims more generally, not just exclusively Palestinians, because there's a lot of international aid here. And in order to try to cleanse place and cleanse evidence of the history of Jews in having lived for many, many, many centuries, millennia even, in East Jerusalem. And so I think both of those are examples of ethnic cleansings that are being attempted currently and actively. If you're talking about the West Bank more generally, outside of East Jerusalem, I don't think that there's that same history.
So maybe I'm just ignorant on this. Maybe I do need to look more into this. And Socrates, you could back me up here if you'd like. But my understanding of the settlements and why I thought they were bad, right, in general, is because what I've been told and what I've heard is that Israelis will move into a place, they will kick out the Palestinians who already live there, and by the point of the gun, sometimes shooting them, right? And just do violence to them and forcefully evict them from their homes. That was my understanding of how some, not all, not even most, but some of the settlers were engaged in. And this was backed up by the state. So the state wouldn't prosecute them. They wouldn't face any consequences. And the Palestinians who lived there would have no recourse, right? They wouldn't be able to appeal to Israel to get their land back or to get their house back. And this was just a thing that continued to happen. Is that incorrect? Have I been lied to?
I guess that was for you, Quibbles.
That's for both of you. Is that generally correct? Am I wrong on this? Am I mistaken?
So my understanding is that's a thing that happens. That's a big issue that I have with the settlements. And it's not just individual Israelis doing this and not getting charged by the government. as we talked about, some, whatever it is, 30 or 60 battalions, those are there to protect those settlements from the Israeli settlers who, in some cases, go out and do terrorist acts on their new neighbors, to make sure they don't have retribution, to protect new walls that are erected around those settlements that push their way into and make Swiss cheese out of the West Bank. Those are really dramatic issues.
Is that incorrect?
So,
Quibbles?
could you repeat the question?
Sure. I'll go over it again. So you are saying, in your view, your contention is that in the West Bank, in general, outside of I'm not talking about the ethnic cleansing of the East Jerusalem. I'm not talking about that, right? I'm talking about the West Bank in general, right? Again, it has been reported, and this is just something as I've understood, and again, I could be very wrong on this, but as I understood it, that a portion of settlers would engage in violence to forcefully evict Palestinians from their homes, and again, the Palestinians would have no recourse legally,
Yeah.
and the IDF forces would back up the settlers in their thing. Is that
So
incorrect?
So what you're talking about is outposts. Outposts. Yes.
Do we condemn those?
Right. Yeah, outposts,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, so no one's doing
But so does the IDF.
Do they? What actions has the IDF taken against outposts?
They've taken they've destroyed certain outposts.
Can you give me an example? Just
that's what I'm trying to find.
I'll link it into the group chat because I'd be very interested in seeing that.
Bader, I don't know how to pronounce this. Give me a second.
Look, pronunciation is something that we all have a problem with. $2 from Cryborn to say great discussion, best I've seen in Twitch Bowl. Well, thank you, Cryborn. Gang, if you agree, subs, bits, etc. You know what? Now, while you're looking for that, I know this is a bit of a non sequitur. It's a bit of a non sequitur, but I did have a small announcement I wanted to make, and since there's people here now, I will make the announcement. Are you guys ready for my announcement? Maybe I should.
I'm
do
ready
this
for your
again,
announcement.
I'll give this now. So, I am going to be part of and participating in the Hype House in February for Destiny's Progressive Victories canvassing house they're doing in Ohio. And so we are going to be working there to help, again, get the word out and get people registered to vote, and basically do some ground pounding for the Democratic Party in Ohio to help make sure that we can turn it blue. And it's been a while since it's been blue, but that's what we're going to do. So in February, on the 16th, from that weekend, I am going to be at the Hype House that they're going to hold. If you guys want to come visit me there, it'll be in Ohio. We'll give you some details later, but that's going to be a thing that we're going to be participating in. Destiny will be there. Not So Erudite will be there. There'll be a few others. I might host a little panel on it. We'll see, right? A live panel. We'll have to see. $2 from Cryborn Super Wick. Great news. Thank you. Anyway, so I am going to be establishing an outpost in Ohio to bring it back to the discussion. As why is that bad? I don't know, but we'll find out. So yeah, thank you for the link, sir. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I sent you the wrong link. So don't look at my link. My link is an error. I meant to say Amona. So Amona is the most recent example. I can try to find you.
$5 from Aaron Sound. Ickle Bickle, you're a pickle. Congrats, Wick. You're an honorary Jew. The Moyle will see you shortly. Thank you.
I'm just gonna send you the wiki because we're wiki streamers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You'll work.
But yeah, it was destroyed. It was completely evacuated in 2017 by order of the IDF. So this is an example of 42 families that were forced out by the Israeli government because they were living on Palestinian land.
So my understanding is that happens at least more often when those I guess I don't know, outposters, I don't know what to call them, when those outposters engage in violence, I don't know, terrorist activity, whatever it is, toward Palestinians who live there. But there's also, so here's just, I'm gonna wiki streamer as well. Just if you look at Israeli outpost on Wikipedia, it says in 2012, 10 unauthorized outposts were retroactively legalized by the Israeli government under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Outposts are often provided with security by the IDF, so even if they're unsanctioned, unauthorized, they might still be under IDF protection. So, I mean, I don't think it follows that these are just generally.
Wait, so which ones are you talking about? Do you want to give it a specific example? Or
here, let me look at the link. Haaretz says
he's like,
says all West Bank settlements, regardless of legal status. So they're like grouping settlements and outposts under one, because settlements without legal status are outposts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So here, I'll just put that.
This is from Haaretz.
Haaretz, yeah. You have to get past the. Let's see if my.
The firewall, yeah.
Yeah, let's see. Or not the firewall, the
paywall. Spoiled again.
Mine isn't working.
Unfortunately, 25. So I can only go by the headline of this. Unfortunately, I can't really dig into this. But let's just assume this is true, right? For now.
Assume what's true.
So let's say that it's mixed. That some outposts are considered like, okay, you guys are, even if it's not them, the outposts are starting it. There's too much violence between you and like nearby Palestinians.
But you still haven't named
We're
one.
pulling this up. Sorry.
You haven't named one.
So Haaretz is saying
I gave you an example of 42 families that they forced out in 2017, which is a very recent past, and you haven't named any counterexample of a place that you think is illegal.
If I give posts that say here's 10, here's 25, here's lots, but I don't give their specific names, is that like not worth talking about? Or I mean,
well, I want a specific name, yeah.
Then
right, I can give you some names.
Maybe we could pool money together to get a Haaretz subscription.
Well, do you want me to lift some more names? I can give you. There's the Mitzip Kadem outpost that was in December of 2023. I can send you a link for that one.
That was removed.
That was removed. Yeah.
So I guess
here's another.
So I'm already with you, probably as far as I'm going to go based on anecdote, that this is a thing that occurs, right?
But I can give you more. Like, here's another one. Go from the outpost.
So
also,
wait.
I can give you Givat Ronen.
Quibbles.
Also, 2022. Right.
I just want you to get where I'm.
But the point is, like,
where I'm.
This is a regular occurrence that the Israeli government is stopping the outposts, and I've so far offered you 4 examples of it.
So
right.
So
that I've been able to find without looking particularly hard.
Yeah. So here's what that buys you. You've given me 4 examples, so now I know that it happens. But when I'm looking from like a 10,000-foot view,
right? But now my point is, I'm looking for.
Well,
I'm looking for 4 examples from you, or looking for one.
Okay, we don't. Hold on. Stop.
Right? I'm looking for.
Please stop. We don't need to go example by example by example.
No, I get that. I get that. My point is, if I've offered 4, and Socrates agrees with this, that if I've offered 4 examples, that it is evident that the IDF does, at least sometimes,
it's a thing that occurs.
Stop these outposts. That is a thing that occurs, right? So now I'm looking for an example of an outpost that the IDF is supporting, despite it having been on stolen land.
Sure. Here, let me look at the other link and see if that goes to something that doesn't have a paywall. Government secretly. Oh, Nofia Nehemia is what this one says it's called here. I haven't vetted this. I can't explain, but I can read if you'd like. Government decision of April 2012 to retroactively legalize 3 outposts, Rehalim, Sansana, and Bruchin, to declare them as new settlements. Commander of the Central Command issued a few days ago order officially establishing the boundaries of Rehalim. Although the government decision did not mention Nofe Nehemia outpost, it turned out that the boundaries of the new settlement of Rehalim includes the outpost of Nefia Nehemia, which is located nearly 2 kilometers west of Rehalim. Okay, so that's 4. So I guess.
Okay, so what we've learned, Kang, just to kind of tie this all together, is that in certain cases the IDF absolutely will get rid of these outposts, but in other
Yeah.
cases the outposts are considered legal. They're
They're turned into
retroactively
settlements.
retroactively become or evolve like a Pokemon
Mm-hmm.
into a settlement. So I guess
Love you.
that yeah, that's the issue, right? In I guess to you, Quibbles, can you
Yeah.
not at least acknowledge that at the very least that this occurring is a detriment to the peace process? That regardless of how
Oh.
much of the percentage of land it is, the fact that it
Mhm.
is an encroachment that does continually happen, small as it is, right? Death by 1,000 paper cuts,
So
is something that is making
for sure. Yeah.
it
So
harder.
in the case of the outposts in general, if it's stolen land, yes, that is an example of something that is bad for the people. I want to be clear in terms of the example. I didn't catch all four of the examples that you provided me, but of Nofea, Nohema, that one is complicated in terms of its legal history. I don't think it's as cut and dry as to say that it is simply an illegal case. We can go into that in more detail if you're curious. But yeah, when there are, just in general, even in terms of the ones that are not illegal, the ones that are being purchased fairly, when you have a population of Jews living in a place that is obviously quite hostile to Jews, and these are locations that are going to have to be part of the independent country of the West Bank, so places like Hebron, yeah, absolutely, those are going to be Jews that make it more difficult to get into independence. What I will say is that the independence is not the only goal that is worth fighting for. I think that that is reasonable. I'm essentially just repeating what I said in the case of my Destiny debate, so I apologize for the listeners who've already heard that. But when I talk about these people, I absolutely condemn them on the grounds of government, but I'm not willing to condemn them on the grounds of religion. And I think that religion is the best way to explain how and why they're coming to the decisions that they're coming to. And so from a religious perspective, they are absolutely correct that Jews were ethnically cleansed from Judea, and that Jews do have an immense tie to that land, and that Jews do have a right to be a component of those spaces, and particularly to have access to the holiest sites in Judaism.
So just
So
this is really interesting. So this is like a total left turn, but what I'm seeing is that I think our differences go maybe deeper than geopolitics, deeper than what is Zionism, and to like what is Judaism. Because for me, I'm a mostly secular Jew. I was bar mitzvahed. I read from the Torah. I can, with a little bit of practice, I could lead a Torah service again. Haven't done that in a bit. But I see my ancestors having moved from place to place, been kicked out different places, and I'm seeing history that's ancient, but I don't have this kind of like, hey, my ancestors probably lived somewhere around here, so like it's important for me as part of doing my religion to like have Jews living there. For me, it's like it's important to treat all people with respect. It's important to like the Passover story. We were kicked out of Egypt. Think about other people who, we were slaves in Egypt. Think about other people who are not free in their homeland. For me, I think about the Palestinians who are not free in their homeland. I can't help but think about it. For me, that's like speaking out against Israel is an expression of my Judaism. Like it's like a very clear, very strong, very definite. But it sounds like for you, there's like an expression of Judaism is to have Jews living in these sites and to preserve the link with these ancestral sites, these holy sites, these sites that have like have artifacts from ancient ancient Jewish villages, settlements, synagogues.
So when I think about Judaism, I think of it as a complicated component. In a lot of ways, I think it mirrors. I've had this conversation with a number of people, including Tom Foolery in the past. I think it mirrors the way that I think about gender versus sexuality. So when we talk about, um, most religions are religions. They're a matter of faith. But Judaism is a little bit more complicated than that because we're an ethno-religious group. We're something that is an ethnicity, and we're also a matter of religion. And so when I think about an ethnicity, that's a people, right? That's a group that is parallel in a lot of ways to a racial group. And you're born into it. You have no choice about whether or not you're going to have the hair that we both have. We have no choice about what we're gonna, that kind of stuff, right?
That's for damn sure.
It's just a reality.
Tried straightening
That's just a reality. Yeah,
Doesn't
yeah,
stick,
yeah. And so, I there are certain components of what it means to be just ethnically Jewish that there's no getting out of. And there are positive components of that, and there are also certainly negative components of it. Even if you were willing to convert, you would still absolutely have been murdered in the Holocaust, right? It's not a matter of conversion. There's no getting away from it. But then when we talk about the second component, the religious component, that's another facet that we have of what it means to be Jewish. And so, when I think about, a lot of people get really, really confused and even ticked off when they're like, what is an atheist Jew? What the fuck does that even mean, right? But like, if you grew up Jewish, you know exactly what that means, right? You know exactly what it means because there's an ethnicity component. There's this idea of a culture. There's this idea of something that goes deeper than it. So when I talk about like, what's the utility of, Sakdan Left really pissed me off when I was talking to him about this earlier, because he asked me essentially the same basic question that you just posed, which is, what he asked it in much more imprecise and perhaps rude manner. But he said basically, were Jews affected? Like Judaism didn't suffer, essentially, is what he said, as a result of being forced out of Judea, as a result of being forced away from the temple, as a result of being forced away from the cave of the patriarchs, all of that, forced to go to Europe, forced to go to Ethiopia, across the rest of the Middle East. And I just reject that. Like, I think that when we're talking about the history of Judaism, in a lot of ways, it's been a history of oppression, and it's been a history of sort of the perpetual minority circumstance. And when I think about this moment in the history of the world, not even just of Jews, but of the world, where we are finally able to have security and safety and access to those sites, I think that access to those sites is something that is important, is something that is relevant to my practice of Judaism, yes, as a religious matter, but also as a matter of ethnic pride. I think that it matters that we are able to have a homeland in our homeland. And I think that is not something that is exclusive to Jews. But a lot of people talk about the Golan Heights and talk about Druze and their access to their sites and their physical safety, Druze, not Jewish people.
I was about to
People
say,
talk
what's
about
a Drew?
Baha'i.
I've never heard that, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. People talk about Baha'i, right? Where they have their sort of their homeland. I'm coming out with a video on them rather shortly. They have their homeland in Jerusalem. Excuse me, not in Jerusalem, in Israel as well. And yeah, I think this is a place that really does matter, and it matters for reasons that extend beyond just the matter of physical security. I think it matters to care about spirituality and an understanding of place.
Yeah, no, that's that was really well said. I think I think there's something really interesting. So when when the temple was destroyed, when Jews were kicked out of Judea, when Jews were scattered in the diaspora, were Jews harmed, or was Judaism harmed? In a way, yes. But this is kind of like if somebody asks you like you had something really painful that you experienced earlier in life, some really hard breakup, parents' divorce, something really, kind of life-changing. Somebody can ask you, was that harmful or was that hurtful? And it's like, well, yeah, of course. But on the other hand, Maybe the answer differs depending on if you feel like you're at a good place now in your life. For me, I feel like I'm at a good place now in my life. So when I look back, I say, that was painful, but that's part of who I am.
Sure, but I don't
because
think that.
because that was
Sorry, continue.
yeah, because that was painful and that was harmful for Jews, for Judaism, but it also kind of like made,
Sure.
that's a critical part of the Jewish identity. That's part of who we are. That's not even, for me, I don't even think of that as something that needs to be fixed by going back, by going back in time and changing it. Yeah.
So I think that the way that I think about this, and I thought about this quite a bit. For context, I live in Pittsburgh. I'm a member of Tree of Life, and was in leadership of my fraternity, my Jewish fraternity, at the time of the shooting.
Wow.
And so we had really long conversations, my friends and I, about Judaism as it extends beyond the pain, if that makes sense, because there's a lot of pain and there's a lot of struggle, and a lot of sort of commitment that comes with trying to maintain a future for a group that has often been on the receiving end of a lot of attacks. And I think that part of building that positive understanding of what we are beyond the way that we've been harmed is about like trying to grapple with that history, yes, but also the history that precedes it, and the history of us as a people in a positive sense. And when I think about the positive components of Judaism, a lot of that positive components of Judaism are in places like the Cave of the Patriarchs, are in places across the Judean Samarian areas, with the exception of a couple of sites in Jerusalem, most notably the Wailing Wall, right? Literally called the Wailing Wall for a damn good reason, because not just one but two of our temples were destroyed, and after the second one was destroyed, then Al-Aqsa, the third most holy site in Islam, was plopped right on top of it, right? And so like all of that history is something that we're going to have to grapple with into the future, but finding a way to create a positive understanding of Judaism, I think, requires that we have, at the very least, access to those sites, and an ability to start to be building those positive narratives as an extension beyond just that suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a difference that must be just of how we were raised, or our temperament, or what I just don't have that connection. I don't feel. I mean, when I went to the Wailing Wall, I definitely felt something. But in general, in terms of my Quibbles, it looks like you're frozen on our end now. Okay, you're back.
You hear me?
Yeah,
everyone's good. I don't know what it's been with today, but people reporting it. We've been freezing on YouTube. I apologize to my audience. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it's the internet. So I'm not sure. But I apologize for the quality today. But we'll get through it. I want you to finish your thought, but then I have a question. I want you to finish your thought, and then I have a question. Go ahead.
So for me, I don't. When I think about the positives of Judaism, I think of, honestly, the positives that came directly out of those negatives. So having been kicked out of our homeland means that we don't have to have a place that defines us. There's more of like a spirit that defines us. There's a Jewish community.
I really
that
don't
can
like
be found
that.
in different places.
I really don't like that.
Yeah, I could see there's like
the reason I don't
really
like that
disconnect. Yeah,
and the reason I don't like that is because, like, why is that true of Jews and not true of Palestinians?
Um,
Like, I think that place fundamentally is part of what makes a people, right? And I think that, like, when I understand the meaning of a Palestinian, like, a lot of Jews will say stuff like, "Oh, well, mandatory Palestine included all of Jordan, right? So I guess Jordan is just a Palestinian state. So they should all fuck off to Jordan and just like bye, right?" That's a stupid thing to say. And the reason it's a stupid thing to say is because what it means to be a Palestinian who is of the West Bank is related to being of the West Bank. What it means to be of what used to be Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, wherever it might be, like, it is of those locations, it is of those places. You can't just like make them move without having an expectation that it's going to fundamentally shatter their culture. And so I'm really uncomfortable when people say that either about Palestinians or about Jews.
Yeah, so I mean, so I can speak for me personally, and then I'll try to speak to the kind of broader question, or for Palestinians. For me personally, I don't individually conceive of my history connecting. If you look at like bright spots in history, like what kind of light up for you, 2,000 years ago doesn't light up the way 100 years ago in Eastern Europe does. When my ancestors were like, wow, a lot of pogroms in Ukraine. This really sucks. Let's go to America. But I don't even feel like, oh, like if we could go back to Ukraine and live there as Jews, that would undo something. That would undo some wrong. I don't even feel that.
Here's the problem. Yeah, the problem that I have with this is, it is true that there are mass populations of Jews who've been forced out, not just of Ukraine, but of every single place that you can name under the sun.
Yeah.
Basically all the Middle East, also all of Northern Africa, and much of Europe as well. And that has all happened in living memory, right? So when I think about this, I think about it in a lot of ways, I think parallel to the history of the United States, which is that we are a country of immigrants in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that what it means to be an American has to do with an understanding of ourselves as a nation of immigrants. And I think that similarly, that when I think about what Israel is, I think of Israel as being a state of refugee, a refugee state of return, is the way I like to describe it. And by refugee state of return, what I mean is that there's multiple components of that. There's the refugee component of it, which is that yes, absolutely, there are many hundreds of thousands of Jews who had absolutely no other option but to go to Israel, and that was the only way that they were going to survive. That's absolutely accurate. But it's also true that it is not simply a matter of they chose a random place out of a hat and they were refugees to that random place in the hat. No, they are refugees. It's a refugee state of return. It's a place of return. They are going back home to their ancestral homeland, to the place that made them as a people. And I think that there is something that is fundamentally shared across Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, whatever it might be, Ethiopian Jews. I think that all of us have this thing in common, which is, yes, partially our history of being oppressed, but beyond that component of our history of being oppressed, the thing that built us, I think, is something that we have in tandem.
Okay. $5 from Zephyr Hash to say land is important because geography shapes history and culture. What you eat depends on the soil and vegetation of a region, etc. Fair enough. I'm gonna let you. Do you want to respond to that? If not, I do have a.
So I have just a brief. It's not even like a response. It's just kind of like an observation and some summation of where we are, which is that clearly within the Jewish spirit, the Jewish community, there's these two really different, like diametrically opposed perspectives, which is for me feeling like, okay, well, we got out of Ukraine, we got to America. America's great. We got out of, okay, I don't know if this is going to sound contentious. I went to Israel. I was like, okay, I am not crazy about the climate. This is desolate as fuck. It's cool what they've been able to grow here. Like, props for them. But I didn't get there and think like this is a paradise. I'm like, this is not a place that I would want to live. So there's me on one hand who's like, it's really interesting, and I do feel some emotional, sense when I go to these different holy sites. But it was mostly like we had a prayer service and a meal, and it felt like being back home in the way having a prayer service and a meal with my community back home felt. That was the part. It was the people doing the thing, no matter where it was. And then there's this other perspective, which is the ancestral homeland and the kind of like reconnection from from where we are now and who we are now to this ancestral homeland and ancestral places that's really, really important. There's clearly this like very, very two different distinct like modes of thought within Judaism, and that's something that I think it's good for people to see that.
Yeah.
I wanted to.
There was someone in
go ahead.
chat who said, this is Dan Barr. Or go for it.
Oh, yeah. If you're gonna be reading chat, we can.
Do I say something quick, or should I go for it?
No, if you want to read
Okay, cool.
chat, make them
Dan
pay
Barr
for it.
said,
Make them give me money.
oh, okay. Dan Barr, pay for it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just going to read him. So Dan Barr said, aren't Jews way safer in Brooklyn than in Israel? There isn't a full-fledged terror group anywhere in North America, so October 7th would have never happened there. Yeah, so I think that this is like there's this question of like, what does safety mean in reference to Jews? And I think that it's a complicated question because one question is a matter of personal security and another is a matter of group security. In a matter of personal security, you're probably right that people in Brooklyn, people in Squirrel Hill, in Pittsburgh, with the exception obviously of one particular event, we are safer in America. That is true. In America, it is not true anywhere in the Middle East other than Israel. It is not true anywhere in South America. It is not true anywhere in Northern Africa. It is not true increasingly in the case of Europe. And so, that's one component, but the broader component is the matter of group security. And a matter of group security is a different question than the matter of personal security. I think in terms of group security, that it's really important that there be some form of group defense. There be some form of Jewish response to attacks on Jews. Say it again?
A community response, perhaps.
Yeah, a community response. Exactly right. And that response can only happen in a modern world through the use of states.
My question was kind of related to the safety issue and to kind of the issue of the world's response to all of this, to Israel, Israel's actions, to Hamas's actions. We've seen a wide variety of responses across the political spectrums, right? Ranging, it has broken apart people who used to be on the same team, right? Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro had a huge split over it, right? Like on the right, and then on the left, you had people like again, you have people who like the DSA and things like that fully going with Hamas, and then you have others who are just like, whoa, this is crazy. No, we're going to side with Israel here. Given that we've seen such I want to see like this push to deny a lot of the atrocities that happened on October 7th, like from Brianna Joy Gray and other major media figures. Even outlets such as BCC, not BCC, the BBC and other such the CNN, other such news outlets who've really downplayed or just run with Hamas propaganda. Do we see that affecting the Jewish place in the world? Does that make sense as a question? Like, do you now see yourself differently in regards to those around you than you did before?
Do you want to go first, or should I?
I mean, I can go first, which is to say, I haven't felt a huge difference. I'm not in those like hyper edgy, stupid stuff saying online lefty groups. which sounds weird to say. I'm here on Twitch, but in general, I'm not on Twitter. I just promoted this show on Twitter. You mentioned Brianna Joy Gray. She's one of those people who it's like when people talk about far left, what they mean is like they're on the left and then they say like dumber stuff. So she was part of whatever, like the Force the Vote, all the stuff. Like I hate this like categorization system where it's like, oh, you're a lefty, but are you really far left? Meaning you're left and you say unspeakably dumb stuff. Like it makes me really sad
there's a large correlation between the two, but go on.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah, that'll be another conversation. But my contention here is that
Yeah,
the farther left, the more dumb shit you say, the more likely you are to be an extremist of some
well,
sort.
sure,
left or right.
sure, by definition,
And I think there's a huge
but
correlation there between far left and far right and saying dumb shit.
Absolutely, yeah. But okay, it's fine. That's a different thing. But I can say throughout my life, so when I started university, I think my first day, I ended up talking to somebody who was like, Israel should be wiped off the map, and I was like, hey, let's let me see if I can bring you in a little bit. And then I talked to somebody else who was like,
maybe that's a little ridiculous. Yeah.
And then I talked literally on the same day to somebody else who was like, oh, what do you mean? Israel's never done anything wrong. Like everything they did was justified. Well, and I was like, okay, well, what about this maybe? So it's like I've always talked to people like this in both directions. I feel like I've always been a little bit in the middle. Me personally, I feel like I've talked to more people within the Jewish community who are like, Israel's done nothing wrong, and to bargain with my uncle, on different holidays and stuff. So it's like that's what I've generally been speaking to.
Sure.
So that's where I come from, and that's why I have more of a perspective.
So I first want to answer the question, but then I want to get to that last part that you said there about internal to Jewish perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the broader thing that this has made me note, like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I got into a bunch of debates with Politically Provoked. I don't know if they're still a thing. There's still a thing online. They're in like Cozy TV, Fortress Arc, but they're a thing. I promise, Wick.
I know who they are.
You're aware.
I just don't know it. I don't follow them.
Yeah. What's relevant is they're insane and they're far right. So yeah, I have done a lot of those debates. I've done a lot of like talking to people online in those worlds. So I was not surprised going into October 7th and when the 8th after it happened started, the response by the far right being crazy anti-Zionist to a point that is obviously anti-Semitic. I was surprised by the response of the left.
Just because I couldn't hear that, you said the far right being anti-Zionist to the point that they're
the far right.
The far right. Okay. I don't want to interrupt you now,
Yeah.
but I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Later, yeah.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah.
Carry on.
I would say put a pin in it. Yeah. That did not surprise me in the slightest. I expected that. And I expected this rift to grow between people like Candace Owens and people like Tucker Carlson versus people like Ben Shapiro, who are more mainstream conservatives and are also happen to be Jewish.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's worth pointing out that Ben Shapiro gets more anti-Semitic attacks, just statistically speaking, this is according to the ADL, than literally anyone else online, left or right. Specifically Ben Shapiro. And it's worth thinking about why. So that's a component. But I was surprised by the extent of the portion online who ended up playing cover for Hamas, from my viewpoint, from a left-wing perspective, or at least claiming to be from a left-wing perspective. That did surprise me. I expected it to some degree. I expected it from people like Jackson Hinkle. I just didn't expect it from everyone who's doing it. And that's worrying to me. And I didn't expect it to I didn't expect that to happen. The second I wanted to touch on before you go ahead and explain your contentions with me. You were saying that your conversation with your family and thought of them to be very pro-Israel to an extent that is perhaps worrying. Certainly agree. I've been to APAC. I actually national anthem APAC, following Tree of Life. All of that.
Sorry, Quibbles. We're just losing you for a lot of.
There's some
Certainly,
technical
yeah.
issue, right? Where I don't know, you're breaking up a little bit.
I know what I can do. Can you hear me?
It's
It's
still
like good
breaking
for a
up.
moment, then like choppy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to go on my phone.
Okay. Give us a second. We're gonna switch. We're gonna switch it up again. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties we've had this stream.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
They don't want us to be talking about this, obviously.
Not entirely your fault.
Fill in your own they.
I know even before, like, I think right when you showed up, or even just before you showed up, Twitch was going in and out on me. YouTube's been freezing overall a few times. I don't know what's up.
Yeah.
It sucks because this is a great conversation, but
Quibbles, you seem like your stream seems totally clear right now. So
yeah,
if you want to give it a shot during this window, yeah, it's
is it working?
It's been working great for the last since you stopped trying to talk.
Cool.
It started...
as soon as you start, yeah. I was gonna go on my phone, but okay, if it's working, it's working. Yeah. So I would say that if you're talking about internal to Judaism, the internal to Judaism conversation is a different conversation than the conversation that you have to have about society in general. So when I think about society in general, I think that society in general in the United States, and particularly online, is, I think, broadly slanted against Israel in ways that I think are a concern. Whereas I think that in terms of internal to Judaism, I would probably agree with you that the slant is in the opposite direction, that it is slanted too far in the way of being pro-Israel. And I would argue that, therefore, when I am talking to other Jews, I do tend to talk to them from a vantage point that is broadly pro-Palestine, with the hope of trying to pull them in that direction. But when we're talking about places like Twitch, Twitch is, I think, broadly in the wrong direction, the opposite direction. And so therefore, that's why my focus in terms of conversations like this that are being had in front of an audience that is online are going to look different, even though my actual views aren't different. But I'm going to emphasize different things because of the audience that is listening, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think broadly that's true. It feels like the degree of kind of like, overall public sentiment towards Israel has changed significantly over the last couple decades because, 20 years ago after 9/11, it feels like Americans in general were like, oh, they're dealing with terrorism. We're dealing with terrorism. We're allies. Like, Israel's based as fuck, whatever they're responding to, they're justified in their response, whatever. And it feels like it's much more recent that there's been a public opinion. It's been, it's actually a question I don't know the answer to, whether public opinion overall versus Jewish opinion has changed like more or faster over the past couple decades, but they've both shifted toward being more critical of Israel, certainly over the last...
At least in the polling that has come out in the last few years even, right? The older you are, the more likely you are to be pro-Israel. The younger cohort, that 35 and below, to be clear, tend to be much less pro-Israel than previously. Yeah. Now, again, why that is, we could discuss, but that is, at least from what I've seen in the West, that is how it goes.
Yeah. So, and I think it's really important that sometimes when you're doing polling, all you can really look at is like kind of pro or anti-Israel or something. But I think in terms of when we're trying to have these really kind of like thoughtful conversations, that it's critical that we don't boil it down too much in terms of like pro or anti-Israel. It's, for me, I think it's critical to be, okay, Israel's a state, it's a country, it exists, it's recognized, it has a right to exist.
Yeah, so in terms of policy,
I'm not interested in pushing people further toward, to the point that they're like, let's get rid of Israel.
Well,
I'm interested in
my point is, when I talk to people, I talk to people on the grounds of policy. Yeah. I'll go for it,
The cogent point here, and the kind of the catalyst for having even all these discussions, even this one, is October 7th and Israel's response to it.
Mhm.
So regardless of whether you want
Sure.
to put some more pro or Israel, when I talk about pro or anti-Israel in this instance, in this context, what we are talking about is Israel's response to Hamas after October 7th and how it has been dealing with Gaza
Mm-hmm.
and the West Bank, more particularly.
Yeah.
Or Gaza in general, and also the West Bank, but that's a different subject. And so when we talk about pro or anti-Israel, what we're talking about, are you okay with what Israel is doing now? What are your problems with what Israel is doing now? Are they justified? When are they not justified? Etc. So I want to kind of redraw and bring us a little back instead
Sure.
of talking about 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Sure.
Talk about
So
today.
So I don't know Socrates. I mean, I didn't really get into it that much on the panel that you watched. My basic view in terms of what we should do in the Gaza Strip is that America should support the Israeli Defense Force going in, occupying it in Area C style in order to get Hamas out of control over it. Obviously, they're not going to be able to wipe out every single member of Hamas, but they're going to be able to get them out of power. And once they're out of power, then immediately try to transition into an Area B style control, which is to say civil control under the authority of Palestinians. They're not the Palestinian Authority as exists currently, so not Fatah, but rather to have an election. That election should be something that's overseen by the UN, ideally, and perhaps ideally also with some others who are coming from Jordan and or Egypt. And then once that's done, that should be done in conjunction also with that being done in Area C of the West Bank. Again, both of these cases, these would be elections. These would not be just folded into under Fatah control under the Palestinian Authority as it exists currently. And then once all of that is done, you'd be trying to have a court system that would have a component of Israeli members on the court, probably an Israeli majority, but you'd also have members from Egypt and probably Qatar and probably Jordan who are on this court as well, who'd be responsible for trying to decipher where a very large sum of money would be going in terms of reparations to the people who have been affected by the war in the Gaza Strip. And then you'd likely also have something parallel to that in the West Bank. That one wouldn't have Egypt, but it would rather have Jordan. And probably Qatar. And I'm not quite sure who the third is, but I do think that it's important to try to have a number of countries that are outside of Israel but are of the Middle East who are involved in that reparations system. Though the money itself would be coming primarily from Israel and from the United States. I think the United States should be willing to now, at this point in time, offer a good deal of that money ahead of time as a guarantor. And I think that is something. Yeah, I've expanded on this in a lot more detail. It's been like a week and a half since I did so, but I did it in a video. If people are curious about it, they're welcome to watch at Quibbles C on YouTube. Okay,
just to kind of summarize it.
Yeah,
for my
that's
audience,
the overview.
Right?
Yeah, that's the overview.
The summary of the summary.
Dumb
the
it
summary
down for the WIC audience.
Yes,
okay,
for the WIC audience, exactly. Got to keep it for the
That's like a 45-minute video. It's in depth. Okay, it's super in depth. Yeah.
But for the Gentiles, okay, what he is saying is that he supports what IDF is doing militarily right now, for the most part, at least.
Careful.
Correct?
That's not what I said. That's not what I said. No. What I said is that I want the
Do you my question then? Do you or do you not support what the IDF is doing militarily against Hamas right now?
Yeah. What the IDF is doing currently. What the IDF is doing currently is primarily focused on getting their the hostages out, which I think is a reasonable thing to be focusing on in the interim. But I think the long-term thing that they're on a trajectory to do currently seems to just be doing a bunch of targeted strikes on Hamas outposts within the West Bank. I don't think that that's a way of actually changing the status quo. I think that changing the status quo is really important. I think that just as a baseline, we have to recognize the status quo is an unacceptable status quo and move from there. Yeah.
Hey, Socrates, you want to give us your summary of your thoughts?
Yeah. So I haven't seen your videos. Maybe I can do like a full watch and review of those. So thank you for the summary. So what you said Wick, I'm not sure about your summary, but Quibbles, what you said overall, like broadly, that sounds fantastic. And especially the second part of reparations coming from Israel and the United States, money up front, which I think
I want to care.
Hold
I
on.
see the money
hold on.
up front. I'm
no,
saying
money like guaranteed
at
up front.
first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm not going to
of course.
actually
Of
divvy it
course,
out.
yeah.
Just for
that would be-
clarity, Socrates. So you would be okay and even support, and it would be fantastic if Israel occupied Gaza again in order to host these elections in the future.
in order, so if they occupy them, so what I heard Quibbles say was to occupy Gaza in order to remove
Yeah.
Hamas from power,
Yes.
and then
But that would involve military occupation, going in with soldiers and the IDF, right? And sitting on them for a time.
Well, so the IDF quoted, I believe, 2 months that they think they need to remove Hamas. If I just read that.
Yes, but they would need to sit there longer to make sure that they don't come back or another group doesn't sit there. So, well, like realistically, what we'd be talking about in that case would be an occupation not of months, but of years.
Okay, well that's a different scenario. I think there's
Wait,
a
hold
lot
on.
of a lot of details that would need to be
That is
hashed
not-
out in that.
That is what I'm calling for. I am calling for an occupation of years. I'm calling
years,
for an
okay.
occupation
Yes.
of Area B style, right?
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that there would be civil control for a matter of years. The civil
Mhm.
control would be a matter of months. But as a matter of military control, just as Area B, not Area C,
Mhm.
is militarily controlled West Bank by Israel, but it is not civilly controlled by Israel, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm calling for.
That's a detail that comes down to militarily what's possible and what's necessary that I don't think I can give like an informed
Yeah, I think that my basic
take on
premise
on
this
what
all
that's going to
comes
take
down
and
to
how that's
as,
gonna,
as a starting
yeah.
point. Yeah, as a starting point, I begin this that
Uh-oh.
we can't expect for Hamas. Oh, is it being nonsense again? Give me a second.
No, it. Okay, he's back. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, I'm on my phone now.
Okay.
I apologize for it being all janky.
Yeah.
Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, I think that when we're talking about for area B to be achieved, you need to have area C first, right? And so in order to get to a point where it is able to be civilly in the hands of the people of Gaza and not to be under the control of this dictatorship, that's going to require first that there be this hopefully very short term period of time that they are under both military and civil control.
Yeah, I think that's I think that probably is necessary. I think having some kind of joint effort. So I don't know how far the U.S. is going to want to go in terms of being involved in that. In terms of pledging money for reparations, reconstruction, I think that's quite plausible. I think if Israel can say, hey, we guarantee that there's no Hamas, money won't go to Hamas, I think that enables a lot of Western aid to come in, and that enables a lot of money to be unlocked in order to do that. So I do agree that Hamas needs to be out of power. I do agree that they have to be removed. I'm not fully committed to an only military, only military strategies involved in doing that. I haven't read enough to see if there's like other, other possibilities in terms of how to do that, other kind of negotiations that can happen with,
I just don't
know,
see
Iran or somebody in order to reduce the amount of fighting that would be needed to remove Hamas, other ways to degrade them.
Yeah,
but
I guess
I do agree that they do need to be removed from
Yeah,
from
my
power.
baseline premise is that Hamas are terrorists. Fatah are not terrorists. Fatah are certainly dictators, and Fatah are certainly incredibly corrupt, as obviously is Hamas as well. But that Fatah is capable of getting to a point where, in a foreseeable future, they are going to be willing to provide a trajectory towards peace. Not necessarily a peace without corruption, but towards a trajectory of peace. And that trajectory of peace is something that we need to understand as being materially dissimilar from the thing that Hamas has to offer, which is exclusively just death and destruction for all foreseeable futures. And so I think that if you're going to be serious about getting to a justice, yes, for Israelis, but I think even more so for Palestinians, that you're not going to get that until Hamas is out of power. So that's sort of my baseline. But yeah, we seem to basically agree in terms of the way that
So
should
what do
be
you think
handled.
about, so in terms of other guarantees at that point, including ending the blockade, the sea blockade with Gaza?
Um, I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future, unfortunately. And the reason for that is because I think that it's really, uh, you know, Egypt has closed its border. People don't talk about this, about the fact that Egypt has closed its border with Gaza for a very long period of time. We're constantly talking about this as being a blockade from the Israeli perspective, and it isn't. Not exclusively. It's a closed border from an Israeli perspective, and the only reason that it's a blockade is because we're counting Egypt as though Egypt is an extension of Israel, but it's not an extension of Israel. In fact, Egypt ought to, in a perfect world, simply take Gaza back, given that Gaza is part of its country, or at the very least used to be part of its country. And it is a very conscious decision that Egypt is not doing that because they don't want to have to deal with the headache. The headache being these 2.2 million innocent people. And so, that's a component of the story that I think increasingly needs to be discussed and isn't discussed. But in terms of whether or not there's going to be just general access to the sea, I want to be clear that there are people are able to fish, people are able to access
Well,
it.
up
They're not able to
to
get to deep.
I don't remember how many.
Yeah,
It's some like
I
small
don't remember
region
the
outward,
exact,
but
but a small amount of
airships
space.
can't come in past
Right,
some
right. And the reason for
border
that,
that's enforced that isn't
correct.
Israel's
Yeah,
border.
correct.
I think
Correct.
technically that's
The
a
reason for
blockade,
that,
whatever we want to load it with. I don't
absolutely,
know. I
absolutely,
mean,
yeah. I just wanted to clarify the Egyptian component of that because I think that it's worth pointing out this is not simply an Israeli component that's happening here. This is not
yeah.
landlocked by Israel exclusively.
So
Um, but
I've heard
but
that before, and
with that,
I've talked to people
yeah,
before, but I do want to clarify. I mean, so there isn't an ability for like direct material aid, I believe, from the West Bank to go to Gaza. That's stopped by Israel, and the sea. That if you look at Gaza, it's like mostly that 25 miles is sea, and then like 5 miles is land. But it's like the sea where most of the aid would be coming, like from Europe. That's like, I don't know whatever like
the
kind of
point is that
proportions you want to put on it.
I
If
think
it's like
unfortunately for the
90
foreseeable
10
future,
or
I think unfortunately for the foreseeable future, there has to be a recognition that even there's a difference between getting Hamas out of power and ending Hamas. Getting Hamas out of power is to say forcing them into the tunnels. But they have 300 miles of tunnels. You simply aren't going to take them all out. It's not going to happen. You're not going to be. We can't even do that to cartel, which is much weaker. We couldn't even do that to the Taliban, which is much weaker, right? When we're talking about Hamas, this is one of the most well-funded by Iran, by Qatar. Made a whole video on the Qatari component of that. This is one of the most well-funded organizations in the world in terms of terrorism, and they are not going to be destroyed even if they're forced out of control over the country,
yeah.
country/area, whatever you want to call it. And so I think that means that you're going to have to be thinking about it rather from a perspective of how are you going to deal with the fact that they're still there once they're out of power. And the way that you deal with it is, unfortunately, you say, okay, they're there, And so therefore we have to figure out how we're going to be able to maintain security and how we're going to be able to maintain safety. Yes, for Jews, but I think more importantly, even for the Palestinians who are living there, because they're the ones who are facing the vast majority of the crimes of Hamas. It is not the Jews who experience the majority of the crimes of Hamas. So yeah, the way that you do that is unfortunately you're going to have yes, aid can come in, but the aid is going to have to be checked and vetted before
Sure.
it
Okay.
does.
Wait. Okay. So that's a really different situation. So vetting aid, boarding ships and being like, okay, this is like water and fuel. This isn't firearms. That's very different from saying like nothing can come in. If that's the case, that's something.
The way that it's done currently is that the reason that they're closed by sea is because there are access points, there are checkpoints where things are being viewed and people actually like literally look truck by truck by truck to see what's coming in. And they do that. It's currently, I forget the name of the border opening, but it's in the north of Gaza to Israel. There used to be one in Egypt. There used to be one in the southern component of Israel as well. There actually used to be a number back in before Hamas came to power. There was actually relatively, I want to be careful here, not open access between them because obviously there were checkpoints, but people were able to go to and from on a daily basis regularly for a long period of time. There were hundreds of thousands of people who were working in Israel proper while living in Gaza.
You're talking about on the Israel side border with Gaza.
The Israel side of the border.
That there was
that is no longer
permeability. Sure.
Prior to Hamas coming to power, there was a long period of time where hundreds of thousands of people were working in Israel proper while living in Gaza. Because of Hamas, that is no longer the case. And I want to hopefully get back to that point in some foreseeable future. But it's not going to happen tomorrow, and it's not going to happen in a year and a half. And it's going to take a long time because every single thing that comes through that border is going to have to be viewed from a vantage point of this could very well have terrorist activity intended for it.
So that's that border, and to some degree, I think that's reasonable. It's reasonable for Israel to be pretty careful about who's directly coming into like Israel proper. I'm talking about the sea border of Gaza and,
right, but that's the issue.
Aid coming in. Okay.
The sea border is when stuff comes in through the sea border, now it's in Gaza and it's going to be used. So if they're able to ship in weapons through the sea border, that's a serious problem because those weapons are going to be used against innocent Israelis, and also they're going to be specifically used against innocent Israelis now, but also like military Israelis, members of the IDF, in Gaza, which is to say that they're going to be doing terrorist activities against IDF soldiers with an understanding that Hamas doesn't give a shit if they take out a bunch of civilians along with it. And so there's going to be many tens of thousands of innocent Gazans who are going to die as a result, and probably thousands, not tens of thousands, of Israelis who are going to die as a result of the fact that there's this open border from the vantage point of the sea. I think it's much better to simply have everything come through land routes, and when those land routes come, have them be vetted.
So by it's better you mean it's easier to like check security.
I think it guarantees safety better. Yeah, I think of the safety of Gaza.
It's not more efficient, certainly. Right?
I don't think. Yeah, efficiency is not the only component that matters. I think that security is the thing that matters as more paramount in this particular case. The security component of just having an open access through the ocean is not, I think, acceptable in this case.
I mean, sorry, I'm just feel bad like looking stuff up, but kind of while we're talking, but it's like, haven't there been international organizations like like the Red Cross or something that have been denied kind of access across the blockade, like the sea blockade into Gaza?
There have been things that have been blocked, and again, it's a really difficult thing to decipher what can and cannot go through, because like, for example, how about gasoline, right? Can gasoline go through? Well, the answer tends to be yes, it can go through. But the issue is that when gasoline goes through, is it sometimes used for military purposes? Absolutely it is. How about water pipes? Absolutely water pipes should be able to go through. Do water pipes get dug out of the ground in order to be used as rockets to be shot at innocent civilians? Yes, they do. That has happened in the past and will happen in the future. How about stuff like you go down the list. All of these different things that are obviously important to the civilians of Gaza are also being used by the terrorist dictatorship that controls them. And so, making those decisions is really difficult. And I think it's worth having these conversations about what exactly should and shouldn't be able to come through. And it's not going to be cut and dry. And it's not going to be easy to make those decisions. But I think that at a baseline, having those decisions get made is better than not having those decisions get made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the two questions that come up then, and this is, I guess, more for kind of people watching. I mean, the countries are going to do what they're going to do, but in terms of our understanding here of these situations, what is life going to look like for Gazans in terms of, so we have this current conflict right now where water is down to like 4% is drinkable, down from whatever 30% or something.
I just want to clarify. I think the last time I saw it was like 87% is not drinkable. But continue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
13 is bad. It's not as bad as 4, but it's certainly very bad. Yeah.
But if all that's done by Israel and or the United States is to set Gaza back to where it was, infrastructure-wise, just before, to set it back to October 6th, infrastructure-wise, the discontent of Gazans isn't going to magically disappear.
For sure.
So
that's why I think that this reparations component is really important as a goal. The reparations component that I was talking about, I think that the United States has an obligation to be a really large component of the solution here. And so, yeah, when Israel,
just to clarify, so reparations, reconstruction, I think what I just read was 2/3 of Gazans have been displaced from their homes. I don't know if that means that every single one of their homes, probably not 2/3 of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed. It's fewer than that, but a lot of homes have been destroyed, right? Like people don't even have somewhere to go back to. So in terms of reparations, rebuilding, just to get things back to October 6th is a lot. But so just to clarify,
when we say displacement does not mean that their home is destroyed.
No. I know. Moving past that, but when we talk about money given by Israel and or the United States to rebuild, reparations, when we talk about, if we're going to have some shared understanding of what you were laying out, what that looks like, it would have to be so far beyond the amount that's required simply to rebuild to the level of October 6th, because that level for Gazans was already intolerable, right?
Yeah.
So,
and this is, I think that, the undergirding fact of the matter is that these people have been living for over a decade under a terrorist dictatorship who does not care about them. And so it is an awful situation. And there's no getting around the fact.
Well, wait, so this is where we run back into where we started the conversation off, which is what are some of these facts of the matter. So my second question was going to be, when it comes to water pipes used for rockets, there's an article that you sent that said that they boasted they could do it, and then the rest of the article was saying, well, they put in the water pipes, they actually built the water infrastructure that they were used for, and the EU said that they weren't diverted. Can you provide some evidence that this has, first of all, ever happened? Because I haven't seen that yet.
Hamas has themselves.
So I saw there was a video of them doing that. There was a video of them doing that, but that was with an Israeli settlement that they were stealing water from Gaza.
No, not exclusively.
Okay. And then the second, kind of almost more important claim is like, well, what proportion of the infrastructure, of the water pipes that have been built, that are being dug up, of water pipes that are arriving, that are used for rockets, what proportion of that is happening with? Because that's a really important thing for us to get an understanding of. Because if the IDF is going to say you can't bring in supplies to build water pipes or fuel because you're going to build rockets, I think that needs to be justified by, is it like 0.1% that gets diverted, 5%,
I want to be clear.
10%, 40%?
Clear. I am not at all saying that we shouldn't be bringing water pipes into the Gaza Strip. What I'm saying is that they have used they've used a lot of civilian infrastructure, whether it be schools, hospitals, whether they're talking about concrete, which they've been using for their underground tunnels. We're talking about barbed wire, again used for their underground tunnels. All of those different things, they're using a lot of infrastructural support that is meant to be going towards their civilians, and they're using it instead on their own terrorist activities. Right? That is just a reality of what's going on. And the solution there is not to say, let's stop bringing concrete so that people can, in a desert, right? Obviously, concrete is how you build buildings in a desert, right? So obviously you need to have concrete. But the solution there is to say, okay, we need to figure out a way that they are no longer in control. Because as long as they're in control, even it doesn't matter what kind of nonprofit you want to start in North Korea. It's going to end up in the hands of Kim Jong-un.
Sure.
And you just, Kim Jong-un is in charge. And so long as Kim Jong-un is in charge, I don't care how many billions of dollars of aid you give to North Korea, it will not help until Kim Jong-un is no longer in power.
So that's something that I haven't seen substantiated. That's something I've heard a lot. I looked into it and I'm not... Okay, let me be clear. I haven't done enough of a search to say that I've I've ruled that out. That doesn't happen. But it just wasn't immediately clear that that's the case. That Hamas is diverting funds and resources on a scale that
their leadership is worth $11 billion.
Yes, and they apparently have.
How did that happen?
Primarily from aid. So a lot of Qatari aid, a lot of individual donation, but that it does not appear to be the case. It does not appear to be the case that development funds, for example, have been diverted. So the EU just did a study, and out of Brussels, Germany, they said funds have not been.
I'm confused. What's the goal of what you're
so the goal of what I'm saying is what I've heard over and over again is these two different claims about Hamas and Gaza. One, that the treatment of Gazans is justified by Hamas's presence. There's a lot to that, obviously, right? Of course, a lot of the security things that Israel does are related to Hamas. But the second aspect of it's kind of this if not for Hamas diverting aid, Gaza would be if I were to say paradise, that would be me being hyperbolic, right? But if not for Hamas diverting aid to Gaza, then Gazans would be doing kind of fine at a humanitarian level. And what I've seen when I looked into it is, they're digging up all the water pipes. Well, it's not all. How much? I can't really find any figures that they're doing any significant level. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying I haven't found it yet. When they're saying, all the aid's been diverted, okay, it seems like a lot of donations are going to Hamas, and they're taking 20% plus $2,000 off the top of things that get smuggled through the tunnels. All right, they have a black market going on. They obviously totally corner it. They're getting wealthy as fuck. They're getting a lot of aid from Qatar and other places. But it doesn't seem to be the case that development aid, for example, so EU funding...
I don't understand. What's the point? My point is, my goal is to see in the future the Gaza Strip be in an Area B style system where this would no longer be a concern.
Sure.
So why are we arguing about?
Here's my issue. I can
my point is I don't want to end up having a conversation that ends up being about what would have been a good idea back on October 6th, because we're post 7th, and now the situation is such that in the future there will be this massive problem of everything is going to have to be going through the lens of there's a very serious possibility that anything that gets in there is going to be used for terrorism. So whether or not that was true on the 6th or not is obviously true now. And so therefore, in this future, I believe that we should be doing this thing, which is to say Area B style control through an Area C style short term, but eventually get to an Area B style system where, that's my goal. If you agree with that or you disagree with that, I'd be curious. But my point is, like, I don't quite understand what the point is of trying to focus the attention on something that's no longer relevant to the conversation. If that makes sense.
So the reason I bring that up is because time and time again, when I talk to people who are much more in the camp of, Israel is only reacting. They absolutely don't have, apartheid or ethnic cleansing or any of these intents. And they make statements like, well, all this aid is going to Gaza. They would be fine, but Hamas diverts it. That's a claim that fundamentally says something about the relationship between Israel and Gaza. If it's the case that Israel is basically doing everything it can do and it's just Hamas, that's a different situation. And it's important fact to know about the matter than if it's the case that Israel is both blockading and not taking the kind of care of a set of people that they're effectively occupying, in the sense that they control, their water and electricity and fuel and things like that. I'm not trying to get into an argument about, like, is it an occupation, but I just mean they have control over those levers around.
It just
Gaza,
seems like my point is
not.
It seems like a vibe check. It seems like what you're trying to do is a vibe check with me, right?
You're
trying to check based on what my view would have been prior to the 6th. You're trying to decipher the legitimacy or illegitimacy of what would be on the 7th.
If I may try to kind of
connect
ahead, these things here, and we are winding down, so this will probably be the last back and forth we have, then we'll get to closings. What Socrates seems to be asking you, Quibbles, is, does Hamas siphon off and redirect a significant amount of aid, and if so,
$11 billion.
What are some of the examples of that happening? Was that
they're worth $11 billion with a B?
Is that a fair characterization of your question, Socrates?
No, I don't believe that it is.
Can you rephrase the question then? Perhaps I'm not understanding.
So I guess like 20% of it is like a vibe check, but it's really more of just like a there are some critical questions when it comes to the shared history between these peoples that these perspectives hinge on. And the claim that Hamas is diverting all these funds and that's why their people are poor is a claim that's used to excuse Israel of any responsibility for their actions. And if it's the case that Israel is not doing the right thing, but we're now going to put them in the position to do the right thing,
I just don't understand. Like,
that's an important thing to know, right?
This has no policy implications as a question. Like, I think
it does.
I like to get away from, I think that we do this a lot in politics, where we're asking questions like this one, which I think are void any context, interesting conversations of trying to place blame. But when you're trying to figure out how you can move forward and how you can get to a place where we're actually getting to a better solution, both from a Gazan perspective and from an Israeli perspective, trying to decipher this placement of blame, I think, is something that is not ultimately helpful. And so to the degree that we want to be able to be, you're talking specifically as a Jew, as someone who has conversations that are, from a vantage point of talking to people who are much further on the pro-Israel side, and also having conversations with people who are much further to the pro-Palestine side of things, I think that firmly taking a stance on these matters, I don't want to to end up taking a stance on this. What I want to take stances on are matters of policy. And I think that when you're talking about something like this, which is not policy, taking a stance on this makes it more difficult for us to advocate for the policy prescriptions, so that makes sense. So like
Wait,
when you're asking for these,
what I'm
the
saying
reason I'm
is,
calling it
yeah,
the reason I'm calling this a vibe check is that if given that it's not actually a question of policy prescription, what you're asking me essentially is to essentially make an appeal to like the correct vibes of one side or the correct vibes of the other side. And I don't want to do that because I think that makes it much more difficult to have conversations in the future with people who are of the other side of the aisle, if that makes sense.
Well,
wait,
And
if
so
I may,
you want to
Quibbles.
be
yeah. So
Yeah, just real
forward.
quick,
so
if
this
I
is
may,
so.
Quibbles.
Wait,
Quibbles, if I may, the
well,
purpose of asking these questions is it's a question of if we go forward with a policy that puts Israel more control
Yeah,
of Gaza than it has, I think
yeah.
it's a very important question to ask, will they be good stewards of the control that
And
they
that's why
give
I think
them?
that
And
yeah, and so
this comes to the heart of the
sure.
argument is where does the blame get allocated when it comes to the state of Gaza October 6th, right?
Absolutely.
And
When you're
what
talking about when you're talking about our job as Americans, right? We both happen to be American Jews, but more broadly, the audience in general, and certainly you, Rick, we're all you know relevant to the American conversation in a way that we're not relevant to the conversation of certainly of the West Bank / Gaza, or even to the conversation of Israel. And so when you're asking me as an American Jew rather than just as a Jew, for a question of that, how like what component of the blame it should be following with different components, it's a it's an interesting conversation that I'd be happy to have with you about the history of ancient Rome or about the Minoans or Mycenaeans. But I'm uncomfortable having those kinds of
that's
conversations.
disanalogous.
No,
Like
the
the
reason I
ancient
think
Rome
it is
doesn't exist
isn't it?
anymore. The ancient
I,
Mycenaeans don't exist anymore. The government that
that's
led
my
to what Gaza is
that's my
absolutely
point.
does exist today.
Right, but Wicked, that's my point. My point is that when we're trying to grapple with like, I can make a like I've been to the West Bank and I've been to speak to the Secretary General of Fatah, not alone with a group of people, but yeah, when I was there, I can make a lot of condemnations, and I don't generally make condemnations of the kinds of things that I saw in his office. Right? There were like physical signs in his office that were, I think, pretty anti-Semitic. Right? But I don't bring it up very regularly because I think that he is broadly on the right side of things, in that he is on the Fatah side of the things, and the Fatah side of things is broadly willing to engage in a way that is closer to possibly a trajectory towards peace. And so, when we're asking about this question of like, well, has the Israeli government made mistakes in the past? Of course, the Israeli government's made mistakes in the past. But if you're trying to figure out like what percentage of blaming deserves to go to which people and which other people, I'm comfortable saying as a blanket statement, yes, I condemn Hamas. But I'm not comfortable as a blanket statement saying that the treatment by Israel or the treatment by Fatah is or is not at a blanket level appropriate. I can condemn individual actions, certainly. I can condemn for example, the fact that they turned off the water for a period of time. That was horrible. But I'm not willing to make these broader kinds of blanket statements because I don't think that it's useful.
yeah. So just to pop back in. So what I'm saying is so not a vibe check. What I was asking were very specific, very factual questions that are in the face of specific claims that people have made to me as part of a vibe check. People have claimed.
Which specific?
So the specific claim, Gaza would have water if Hamas didn't dig up their water supply.
Oh, as a specific claim, that is almost certainly accurate. Yeah.
Okay, that's something I haven't seen validated. That's something that I would like to see
as a
validated.
proportion, sure.
Right? Not a vibe check,
yeah,
very specific. But here's
Okay,
here's the
fine.
thing, and this is why I think some of these things are critical to actually look at. So first, just starting with historical, and then going to what we're talking about now. when we looked at South Africa and apartheid and ending apartheid,
80%. I'm putting this in the chat.
Yeah,
80% of the water in the West Bank is from groundwater, right? So when we're talking about that groundwater, the reason that groundwater isn't being able to be accessed and isn't being able to be clean is because there is not an ability to put in the kind of money and put in the kind of effort there that they otherwise would be able to do. There are lots of countries that
don't have fuel
want to do that.
reserves. No
Specifically,
fuel has entered Gaza the past 4 weeks.
I'm sorry?
It says no fuel has entered Gaza the past 4 weeks.
Yeah, in the past
Some
4
80%
weeks.
also says some 80% of Gaza's water supply is located in wells and groundwater aquifers, which require fuel and for extraction and desalinization.
So the assertion would be.
The point is the reason that I bring that up is because that is evidence that if Hamas was not in the way, if instead of spending the $11 billion on their penthouses in Qatar, they were instead spending that $11 billion on water security for their own people, then absolutely their people would have access to water, right?
How would they have water security if they don't have fuel? It says, this doesn't say Hamas dug up their water supply.
You asked whether or not if Hamas wanted to, which would require, for example, not doing stuff like October 7th, not doing constant rocket campaigns against
leaving
people.
aside October 7th, because we're talking about, obviously what they did on October 7th has negative repercussions for Gaza. That's
the reason.
Obviously,
the reason they don't have access. The reason they don't have access to that fuel, and the reason they don't have access to all of the stuff required here, is because of their terrorism campaign. They certainly do have monetarily enough to pay for all of the water access that they would need, right? It's not a matter of they don't have enough aid. It's not a matter of even without aid at this point, they have enough money just personally to achieve this. But they are not.
Hamas leaders have,
like you said, $11 billion.
If they were to just take some of their own money and put it into like buying more water, I actually don't. I don't even know at this moment if that would be feasible. But in general, that's something that they could simply just use their money.
They could have done.
That's
the
true.
point is over the period
that's not
of
my
last
contention.
decade. Had they chosen to focus on that instead,
Sure,
they could have.
But I asked a very specific thing. There was a claim made to me. Gaza would have water if Hamas didn't dig up their water pipes.
Yes, to which the answer is obviously yes. If Hamas was not engaged in terror,
this doesn't say that anywhere.
I don't know. What evidence would you want to look for?
I would want some evidence that they dug up a significant proportion of water pipes.
Okay. No, that's not what I said.
Or diverted a significant number of water pipes.
Hold on. That's not what I said. You asked me, right, whether or not there would be access to for the people of the Gaza Strip to water were it not for Hamas, right? That was the question. Yes.
That was one question. Yeah, but
okay. So hold on.
There's this other specific claim.
I want to stick with that question. I'm going to answer it, then I can get to your second question.
Okay.
So the answer to that is there is absolutely enough money. There is absolutely a capacity in terms of technology to provide for it. And there is absolutely many people in the international community who would want to provide it. They're not able to do it. The reason they're not able to do it is because of the terrorism, because there's an inability to get aid into physical infrastructure into the Gaza Strip, and that is because of Hamas.
So Hamas is a cause. The proximate cause is Israel won't let it in, right? Like those are both accurate statements, right? Wait.
Israel can't let.
I'm not grandstanding. I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm just laying down uncontentious things so that we can get to some sort of shared understanding, right?
Right, but Israel cannot let it in.
Israel has decided not to let it in. The reason is because of Hamas terrorism.
Right.
They could. The UN says that blockade is illegal. I believe. I might be wrong about that.
No, that's not true.
The UN doesn't say that?
No. This component, no. I believe that they do in terms of the what's it called? In terms of the ocean. But if you're talking about the stuff that's on
I was talking about the ocean, yeah.
Oh, okay. That I believe is actually not even sure. I've looked into it.
Yeah, I think it's considered illegal. Yeah.
I don't know. I think we're going back and forth over this.
Okay, but go ahead. So that broader claim, that's a complicated question. The specific claim, Hamas is tearing up all the water pipes. That's why they don't have water. It seems like you're
No,
telling me
no,
that's not something
that's not
that
what
can be
that's not what I
substantiated.
said. What I said is that Gaza does not have water because of Hamas. That's different than it is strictly because they are tearing up the water pipes.
Okay,
in a direct sense.
that's a claim. Maybe you've never made that claim, but that's a claim I've heard a lot. That's a claim that's certainly been in
It's an
play.
imprecise claim, but I don't think that it's incorrect.
Okay.
I think that there's a difference between imprecision and incorrect.
So
The point that people are making there is that they're saying that as a broader point, that people do not have access to water in the Gaza Strip as a result of the actions of Hamas.
Okay.
Right. So when they're pointing to specifically this matter of pulling up water, they're taking something that is a very notable example. Right. In the same way that we might, in the case of like, if we're talking about, the civil rights of black people in the United States.
I haven't seen it substantiated. You say it's notable. I just
substantiated for you.
Where?
Wait, I just substantiated the water crisis writ large.
No, not the water crisis.
An issue.
Pulling up water pipes.
No, stop. You're not understanding what I'm saying. This is a very simple case, okay? What I'm saying is that the water crisis is the result of Hamas, right? Now, I'm saying that is the statement. Now, the matter of the water pipes is a different point than the broader statement that the water crisis is the result of Hamas. If you're talking about the water pipes, that is not the reason for the water crisis as a whole. It is an additional, I think, pain point. It's an additional, like, it's an example of something.
What is an additional pain point?
It's an example of something that is just such overwhelming evidence. I think like the equivalent that I would make is in terms of like when I think about, Black Lives Matter in the United States, right? I don't think that the matter of occasionally black people are shot by the police is the primary problem of Black Lives Matter. The primary problem of Black Lives Matter is the matter of like just general day-to-day statistical irregularities, statistical distinctions in terms of the way that black people, particularly black men, are treated by the police versus the way that white people are, right? That's the broader problem. These are flashpoints. We look at this matter of them literally pulling up water pipes as a flashpoint in the same way that we might look to individual black people being shot as a flashpoint of a broader issue, the broader issue being water access being something that the Hamas terrorists don't take seriously.
So what you're talking about as a broader point is complicated, nuanced. There's a lot to it. I don't think that simply the statement Hamas is stopping them from getting water or as simple causation as because of Hamas, they're not getting water. That is a cause. It's also a cause that Gaza is not getting water because of the Israeli blockade. I'm not trying to start an argument. I'm not trying to smear Israel. Right? That's simply just like, so these conversations when we can't just say yes and move on to bare facts, it makes things tough.
I hear you. I get that.
Because I want to just understand the situation. I obviously have my biases, I have my prejudices, but on some points, I really am just truly trying to understand the historical record, just what's literally happening on the ground.
I do. I get that. I do. I think that the problem is that when we're having these conversations, often people will like.
Well, they'll take it and run with it. They'll say, "Aha, I got you."
Take it and run
now
with it
we can blame everything on Israel. Remove the context. Exactly.
Yeah. So the reason that
I'm asking you to trust me that I'm not going to do that on Mia Socrates.
Yeah.
That I'm not going to do
PDX
that.
plan.
Because that would be against my brand, and that would hurt my
Quibbles
against
the
brand.
Said
against
it
the brand.
should be more policy focused, but do Israelis get to vote on ending the blockade in the Strip? Don't Gazans get water from Israel?
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm just going to read it again. Do Israelis? First of all, Israelis, not Israelis. Okay, you have to spell better. Okay, that's number one. Do Israelis get to vote on ending the blockade in the Strip? Don't Gazans get water from Israel? Do they directly get to vote on it? No, but they have a parliamentary system, and the parliamentary system means that they're able to have particularly people like the parliamentary system, arguably, kind of a little bit better than our system in the United States, but that's a different conversation. Okay, the point is they can absolutely influence it. And to the degree that they're able to influence it, that's a good thing. And I think that we in the United States are also able to influence our own politics. And the degree that we do that, I think, is a good thing. So I think that the way that we should be focusing on is that we should be focusing on trying to be the ones who are able to provide that reparations component post-occupation or post-war. I think that's what we should be focused on. And if you're talking about what should Israelis do, Israeli citizens, yeah, they should be focusing on trying to make sure that there's water access for the people of the Gaza Strip. Yeah. All right. I feel like we've covered.
Okay, look. I'm gonna be real with you guys. This has been a terrible ending to this debate because it was we were quibbling, let's say.
Yeah,
I wanted to give each of you a closing statement, tell people where they can find.
Hey, we wanted to talk about men. We wanted to talk about men. You're having a men test, right?
Oh, that's tomorrow, but I'll get to that.
No, we had a thing just us. I mean, Wick, if you're done, we might.
If you're down for it,
I think the two of us might just elope and talk about it on our own.
But you're welcome. You're welcome.
I mean, I got stuff to do.
That's fair. That's fair
enough. Like you guys can maybe call in tomorrow as well if you'd like to share it with my audience. Yeah, but for now, I want to end this. I'm not gonna lie to you. And so I guess, gang,
having to listen to two Jews for like fucking 2.5 hours. Oh my god.
Too much. Okay. I won't make any jokes because the jokes that come to mind are very inappropriate.
Okay, then you have to DM them to me.
I will. But I will say that if you like the content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the follow button if you're watching this on Kick or on Twitch. If you want to super chat, if you want to give some subs, if you want to throw some bits, all that helps. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, we are going to have an all-men panel discussing the woman question. What should be done? What can be done? They're a menace, and something needs to give. Okay, so I've brought in the most manly men that I could find in order to discuss that. So we're going to have counterpoints there. We have Ali there. We're going to have Prime Kai there. It's going to be Smeth's going to be joining us, Tom Foolery. It'll be great. So check us out, 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Should be a blast. Should be great. But before we go, I wanted to give each of these individuals a chance to shout themselves out and kind of give them a concise closing statement, and then we'll kind of end it here. And I wanted to start with Quibbles, and then we'll end with Socrates. So Quibbles.
At Quibbles C on Twitter and also on YouTube. Quibbles Over Coffee is the name on Twitter. I don't know why. I should probably change that. At some point, I need to get better at branding. But that's who I am, at Quibbles C.
Okay, Socrates.
Wait, are we doing just like shout outs
if you want to give your closing statement, you may.
Are we doing closing statement? I should have done that. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, you still have time.
No, it's fine.
Are you sure?
Okay, you're not going to. Okay, he's waving his right. Go ahead.
You can find me at Socrates TV on Twitch. You can find me on my newly launched YouTube, Real Socrates, and also on Twitter at Real Socrates. I mean, this was everything I hoped for and more in terms of a conversation. I felt like this was, despite butting heads a little bit, I felt like we really, really got into a lot of like substance of the matter. I really appreciated that.
Good, cool. Gang. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I think it was great right up until the very end. In the end, it kind of felt small a little bit, but I think it was a great show. Again, remember tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern. For now, we're going to raid out to Tiberius D. Make sure you let him know his hate raid. And thank you all for coming. I'm sorry again for the technical difficulties we had today. I will see you guys on the flip side. Bye-bye.
All right. And my stream is not ending, so if you want to see...
Wait, are we talking about boys now then? Let's talk about boys.
Yeah, let's do it. Here, we can jump into my Discord.